My name is Sungbom. I was 24 years old, a few years out of university, and already deep into the grind of society, and the one habit I had kept from my student days was finding something to watch while eating. That evening I sat on the tiled floor of my rented 6th-floor room, a bowl of old wet master's brain-damaging pickled cabbage noodles in hand, with a marine arthropod streaming on my laptop. I fired off a bullet comment about hoping everyone would reach Holy Terrace soon, settled back against the old leather sofa, and let the shared enthusiasm of the comment section wash the day's overtime off me. The air was still thick with summer heat even through the screen window, the bedroom air conditioner off to save electricity, the fan making its best effort from the corner. That laptop had been with me since university, down to a machine that could only manage video playback now. I had ordered a purity seal online, a red cloth strip printed with garbled Latin prayers, and glued it to the back of the lid, and I had convinced myself at least somewhat that the computer had been more stable since. A small tech priest incense burner sat on the coffee table beside it, trembling faintly each time I slurped. The battery inside had warped and aged from being left plugged in year-round, and I had no idea. The smell reached me before I saw anything. A faint scorched thread cutting through the instant noodle steam, and by the time I noticed it, black smoke was already drifting from the ventilation slot. I jerked upright and stood, knocking the noodle container over, and the remaining soup spilled straight across the keyboard. I lunged to grab the laptop anyway, instinct ahead of reasoning, and the moment my hands made contact, the warped lithium battery found its tipping point between the soaking soup and the short circuit that had been building for months. Flames climbed the coffee table. I startled backward, landed one foot on the old leather sofa, and felt the slick, sweat-soaked surface give way beneath me. I went through the screen window. The mesh, brittle with age, shredded on contact, and pulled the plastic window frame out of its groove with it. My hands caught nothing. The purity seal burned in the room behind me, and the old incense in the tech priest burner caught from the spreading flames, and a wisp of smoke curled around the burning prayer before following me out into the night wind. I landed headfirst on the ground 6 floors below. I came back to consciousness in the grip of pain that spread from my skull down through every limb. The sky held 2 celestial bodies radiating purple and blue light where the moon should have been, and the ground beneath me smelled of forest soil. Before I could clear my thoughts, a cold voice resolved directly in my mind, telling me I had arrived on the endless continent as Survivor 73481 and that the survival system had been activated. Only the strong had the ultimate right to choose. A semi-transparent attribute panel materialized in my vision, bordered in blue light. It listed my name and my race as human. My special attribute read as corrupted text. My life status showed moderate craniocerebral injury with multiple soft tissue contusions, near death but rapidly recovering, and my stamina read exhausted. Below that, a one-time injury repair counting down its last few seconds, then the communication, trading, and manufacturing systems confirmed open, and at the bottom, a line stating that my personal backpack activation had failed, followed by an error prompt and a notice that balance compensation was being calculated. I understood the basic framework from the transmigration novels I had read at work. My first impression was that the system looked sparse, no conventional attributes, no level, the special attribute corrupted beyond reading. My second impression, which I found briefly comforting, was that the setting did not look anything like Warhammer 40k. The Lobster's recruitment drive had apparently been fictional. I pressed 2 fingers to my head and felt the wound already closing under them. The compensation arrived, a pale blue wristband appearing in my hand, cold to the touch and made of some material I could not identify, described as a subdimensional storage device with 2 cubic meters of space and neural access control. I slipped my arm through it, felt it tighten and bind to my wrist, felt a brief tingle as it completed its binding and access protocols, and then I simply knew how to use it. I set my palm on a large half-buried stone nearby and thought the command, and the stone, at least 50 kilograms, vanished. I retrieved it and it reappeared in front of me. My injury repair status had cleared. Life status now read healthy and stamina had shifted to abundant. I stood in a forest clearing in only my shorts, and the sensible thing was to check the system before anything else arrived. I opened the manufacturing interface. The blue-bordered panel shattered. What replaced it bore no resemblance to a standard survival system. Rotating gears and pale skulls filled my vision. An Imperial Aquila glittered somewhere in the arrangement, and dense binary code scrolled alongside fragments of short Latin phrases. A warning announced that unknown interference had been detected, and that a protocol override was in progress. A signal reached through the static, confirmed authorization, and the interface declared its praise of the Omnissiah and instructed me to chant the litany and spread its glory. I stared at it. The aesthetic was utterly, completely unmistakable. Skulls, cogwheels, rivets, faith, the exact flavor of sacred fanaticism I had spent hours absorbing through video streams. This was Warhammer 40k's Adeptus Mechanicus. My special attribute, which I had not yet noticed had stopped being corrupted text, now reads simply as untouchable. The exchange list unfolded and covered everything from a compressed ration block to void-capable warships. The ration block was synthesized from unknown organic matter in a starch matrix, described as tasting like chewing wet wood but providing basic nutrition, with a note that it might contain trace amounts of promethium and that long-term consequences were unknown. Water purification tablets were blessed by the ecclesiarchy, capable of removing trace chaos corruption from water, and their output would apparently carry a faint smell of machine oil and incense. Weapons ranged from a crude gang dagger at 50 points to a master-crafted composite bolt gun designed for Space Marines, with ammunition sold separately. Materials spanned from basic playsteel shards and ceramite granules up to phase iron, darkstar ore, and adamantium, with prices reaching 200,000 points per unit at the high end. The master-crafted manufacturing option could improve any single piece of equipment for a 30% point surcharge. A blessing service allowed organizing a void blessing ritual that might produce unexpected outcomes on any technological device. I had not eaten since before the fall. I was unarmed, and I was standing in an alien forest in shorts. I opened the communication channel to find out how survival points worked. The area channel scrolled with messages from other survivors comparing notes. Several confirmed they had arrived after near-death experiences and lost consciousness, similar to my own. One explained that the personal backpack the system had mentioned could be accessed as a cloth bag inside it labeled Survivor Supply Pack. I tried again to summon a personal backpack and received no response. Only the cold weight of the storage wristband. Someone reported that killing a snake had yielded 1 point. Another had found glass-like objects in ruins that gave 10 points each when smashed, identified as high-purity crystal. The channel moved fast and chaotically, but the pattern was clear. Killing creatures and gathering resources both generated points, with the amount depending on the strength of the target or the quality of the resource. I looked again at my attribute panel, and this time focused on the special attribute column, now readable as untouchable. An untouchable in the 40k setting was defined as a soulless person. Someone born with a null trait that projected an anti-psionic field and caused anyone with soul sensitivity to feel instinctive disgust and discomfort when near them. The system had almost certainly failed to activate my personal backpack, because my null field disrupted anything that relied on soul-based energy, and the storage device was the compensation workaround. I understood my situation a little better. I was still unarmed in a forest. A sound came from the bushes, and it came from more than one spot at once. Several creatures pushed through the undergrowth toward me, low-bodied, with segmented legs and a forward momentum that did not look exploratory. I scanned the ground nearby. My only potential weapons were the rocks I'd been testing the storage device with. I widened my stance as the nearest creature launched itself at me, sidestepped it, slapped my palm to the large stone, and stored that. 1-2. I got both arms around a nearby tree trunk and climbed using friction against my bare skin, the bark tearing me up as I pulled myself to 2 meters above the ground. The digging ratworms, 7 of them, gathered below. Their segmented legs were too short for climbing, and they could not jump. 2 started scraping the trunk with sharp forelimbs. I clamped my legs tight to hold my position, aimed the storage device at the group clustered directly beneath me, and released both stones at once. 4 clear impacts rang out across the carapaces. The shells held, but the worms immediately went rigid, their inner organs damaged, wailing with sharp piercing cries. I descended slightly, reached my toes to the stone, stored it again, then climbed back up to wait. A few minutes later, the remaining worms clustered around their dead companions and began feeding on the remains. I released the stone from above a second time. 2 more went down. The third was pinned but alive, its legs thrashing against the dirt. I dropped from the trunk, planted my weight through the stone, and felt the shell give way. My health status showed mild bruising on my feet, but nothing structural. My log showed 3 notifications, 6 worms killed in 2 groups plus 1, totaling 21 points at 3 points per creature. I was using a branch to poke through the sticky remains when I noticed white smoke rising from one pile and something hard embedded in it. I worked it free carefully, checked the system description, and got a notification of 15 points as ore that had been in the process of being dissolved by the creature's digestive fluid. I looked at the dagger I still had from my earlier purchase, the part of the blade that had touched the residue already turning black. I scraped it against soil repeatedly until the acid coating came away. The system updated its description of the dagger from functional to brittle, and barely usable. I found ore in 2 more worm piles by probing with the branch, brought both pieces clean by burying and rinsing them with soil, and stored them. 12 and 18 points arrived for those, bringing my total to 47. I listed the smallest piece on the market at 30 points as a test, noting in the description that the worm digestive acid was extremely corrosive and required careful handling. The market in those first hours was a scramble. Food and water were hard currency. Weapons were scarce and expensive. I filtered for clothing and footwear and found a dark blue tracksuit for 5 points and worn sports shoes for 4, paid 9 points and put them on when they arrived. The rough fabric was a strange comfort after the open air. For a weapon, I found a steel dagger with several chips and a broken tip, sourced from beside a body according to the seller, described as good material and quite sharp despite the damage. I paid 10 points and arrived at a balance of 2. Following the tree line where the forest thinned, I walked for half an hour before reaching a place where the woodland simply stopped. An endless desert lay on the other side with no transition zone. The two ecosystems pressed together along a seam as if someone had assembled a map without caring whether the pieces matched. I stepped across and a wall of heat hit me immediately, the sand scorching through the soles of my shoes and the wind burning my face. I estimated at least 40 degrees, possibly more. I stepped back into the shade. I stood at the boundary and thought about the survivors spawned into the desert. Without clothes at the start, a person there would have had minutes before the heat brought them down. My forest spawn had its own problems but was measurably better. I returned to the tree line and sat down against a trunk to think through priorities. Water was the most pressing issue, and my system had no directly drinkable water in the exchange list. The cheapest item on the market was a 500 milliliter bottle of mineral water at 20 points, with murky river water at 15 and tiny dew collections at 8. Desert survivors were competing hard for every available water source and driving prices up. My system offered water purification tablets at 8 points each, which was a potentially useful gap. I bought a deformed iron pot from the market for 3 points after confirming it did not leak, then found 2 listings of stream water explicitly flagged as unprocessed and potentially fatal even after boiling. At 5 points per portion, I bought 2 portions and 1 water purification tablet for my system for 8 points. My balance sat at 26. The tablet was a dense pill, grayish-white, with the Mechanicus skull and gear symbol pressed into one face and an Inquisition emblem on the other. An Inquisition water purification tablet, designed for operatives traveling across a galaxy of hostile environments and chaos-touched water sources. Its effectiveness would not be ordinary. I dropped it into the pot I had filled with both portions of stream water and watched the surface begin to churn. Fine bubbles rose for several minutes while microscopic filaments I could barely perceive at the edges of visibility writhed and went still. And then the churning stopped, and a thin layer of gray-white material settled at the bottom. I scooped up a small amount with my palm, and the system identified it as clean water with a strange taste. Not pleasant, but harmless. I bought 10 empty plastic bottles for 2 points and bottled the clean water, discarding the 100 milliliters of residue mixed with the precipitate. 850 milliliters of purified water remained. I posted one 500 milliliter bottle at 14 points, and it sold immediately. I reinvested the proceeds into more stream water and another tablet, ran a 3-liter purification that left slightly more residue but still cleared the fatal designation, bottled the result, and listed 6 bottles at 14 points each. The stream water seller I had relied on came back as a dead account when I checked the serial number. The trading system did not cancel listings when a seller died. The points from those sales had probably dissolved into the system rather than crediting to anyone. I had paid 10 points in trade to a corpse. I stared at the error message for a moment, then closed it. My balance climbed to 84 as the bottles sold. The window lasted less than an hour. Someone in the regional channel shared a method for building a basic water filter from a cut bottle, cloth, sand, and ash, and prices on raw water sources began shifting as more survivors cut out the middleman. The first mover advantage was gone. I spent 10 points on 2 crude ration blocks and 8 on another purification tablet, leaving 66 in reserve. Then I looked again at the crafting interface and the item I had been postponing. The crude combat dagger cost 50 points. It was made from recycled scrap metal in Hive City bottom-tier workshops, described as extremely durable and resistant to significant abuse. Its material of unknown but clearly superior composition. The note advised against testing it on Gensteel or Carapace or Ceramite products. I confirmed the exchange. The dagger that arrived weighed nearly a kilogram, thick-spined, single-edged, covered in forge marks and scratches. Its grip wrapped in leather that smelled unpleasant, and its crossguard nothing more than 2 small iron plates welded to the base. I took a small amount of digging ratworm acid residue on the rough blade tip and watched it. No reaction at all. Scrap metal from the interstellar era apparently shrugged off acid that had degraded normal steel in seconds. I swung the dagger twice, getting used to its weight, and felt the sense of security that a genuinely dangerous object in one's hand provides. It was worth every point. Night settled fully and the forest stopped being a neutral space. Strange sounds came from all directions. Distant beast howls, nearby insect noise, and beneath it all a category of rustling that fit neither the wind nor the insects. I had built myself a sleeping platform earlier, inserting cut branches into holes carved in the trunk, until I had a frame at 5 meters up, covered with leafy branches for concealment. I bought a length of hemp rope from the market for 3 points, tied one end under my arms and the other to the trunk above, and settled in with the crude combat dagger gripped in both hands. A soft shuffling sound, clearly distinct from the ambient noise, came from below sometime in the deep hours. I opened my eyes, controlled my breathing, and looked through the leaf cover. Several short, dark shapes moved through the underbrush below, their large eyes pulsing with pale purple light, and their high-arched tails tipped with bony spurs that glowed blue-purple, illuminating small circles of ground. The nearest one reached the base of my tree and went still. My log updated with a kill entry for 8 points for a shadow scorpion-tailed weasel. I had not moved. The creature had simply died at the base of my tree. More gathered, drawn by whatever signal the first had been tracking. A group of perhaps 12 pairs of pale purple eyes tilted upward and locked onto my position. Several of the ones further back arched their bodies and pointed their tail spurs at my platform. I recognized what was coming in the fraction of a second before it did, rolled off the platform, and grabbed a thick branch I had left in place for this purpose. A volley of bone spurs tore through the frame I had just been lying on, driving into the wood like nails fired at close range. I let go, fell the remaining distance, rolled on landing, and oriented using the glow of their eyes. I pressed my back against the widest tree shadow I could find and took the first charging weasel as it lost consciousness within my range and crumpled mid-sprint. I drove the dagger through its skull, felt the blade punch through with almost no resistance, and felt warm blood run across my hand. 6 more fell over the following minutes, each one going out like a lamp the moment it crossed whatever threshold defined my null field. The rest hesitated, circled, attempted a few more approaches that cost them additional casualties, and then abandoned the hunt and vanished into the dark. I sat against the tree and waited for my heart rate to slow. My status showed mild bruising across most of my body from the fall, nothing serious. I checked the log when I felt calmer. 9 shadow scorpion-tailed weasels total, the 3 kill records adding 64 points to my previous balance. I now had 88 points. I told myself that for a first night the outcome was not too bad, all things considered, and the reference to the Emperor above came out under my breath without me entirely meaning it. I found a different fork in the same tree and settled in for the rest of the night, sitting upright with the dagger across my knees. I understood now what had happened. Shadow scorpion-tailed weasels use psychic power to conduct energy through their bone claws and tail spurs, which made them fragile psychers in the framework my system had been built from. An Untouchable's null field was described in the source material as devastating to soul-sensitive beings, capable of causing everything from nausea to outright death in psychers who got too close. Most of those weasels had not been killed by fighting. They had been killed by proximity. I waited for dawn, thinking it over. At some point I stood and began moving in what I thought was the direction of my original tree, checking the faint light filtering through the canopy for orientation. The forest looked the same in every direction, and I had scrambled far from my starting point in the dark. I was heading back, I told myself, and had not yet understood that I had already strayed well off course. The forest was darker in the direction I had chosen, the trees growing taller and closer together as I moved, the light overhead fading from faint to almost nothing. I stopped, reached out to feel for trunks ahead, and understood what I had done. My scrambling in the dark during the weasel attack had disoriented me completely. Instead of working my way back toward the sparser forest edge where my platform was, I had been heading deeper into unknown woodland. Wandering blind in a strange environment was its own kind of suicide. I turned back toward the slightly brighter direction I had come from and moved carefully, one hand ahead of me, until I found a spot where the trees opened enough to sit down safely. I needed to solve the problem of moving at night. I pulled up the system interface and scrolled through the item list, looking for anything that gave visibility in darkness. The first relevant results were a bionic eye implant that could do multi-spectrum vision and an assault helmet with built-in night vision, both requiring several thousand survival points plus material costs I had no way to cover. The market was equally barren of practical options in the high-tech range. No survivor on their first night was sitting on that kind of wealth. I switched my search to illumination and found 3 options. A homemade torch soaked in biological oil lasting about half an hour for 4 points, a broken LED flashlight of uncertain battery life for 18, and a fresh spotlight flashlight with a rechargeable port for 55. The rechargeable port on that last one would be useless without a power source. My system had a flashlight of its own, a standard flashlight in conventional Imperial Forces issue, powered by a liquid metal core energy cell that could be recharged via solar exposure, charging devices, or even open flame. 100 points. The note helpfully added that in a desperate situation, a fully charged energy cell inserted into a laser rifle's magazine slot could fire a single attenuated shot, and that firing it into one's own head represented the Emperor's final salvation. I was 12 points short. I listed my remaining half-eaten ration block on the market at 5 points, noting it had a complex nutritional profile far exceeding ordinary compressed biscuits, though its texture and smell were genuinely miserable. I listed the brittle chipped steel dagger at 8 points, the cheapest functional weapon on the market despite its corroded condition. Both sold before long, and with 101 points in my balance, I confirmed the exchange for the flashlight. It arrived heavy and solid in my hand, all metal casing with a simple mechanical switch. I pressed the slider, and a bright conical beam cut through the forest dark immediately. I twisted the lens hood, and the beam widened or narrowed, clean and reliable, nothing like the uncertain battery life of anything on the player market. I tightened the illumination range to something practical, took the dagger in my other hand, and started moving toward the edge of the forest. The flashlight threw large shadows across the trees and made the dark between them feel deeper by contrast. But it revealed what mattered: the ground ahead. I was looking for my own tracks and found them about 100 meters in, along with scattered dark drops from the blade I had used to kill the weasel. The blood trail led me back to the kill site. With proper light, I could finally see the creatures I had been fighting. The one I had stabbed was in poor shape, fur perforated multiple times, bone tail sliced off cleanly. The others were undamaged on the surface but clearly dead, each one curled with its front claws pressed against its head, teeth fully exposed, the expression of something that had suffered extreme distress in its last moments. I thought about what I knew of untouchables and their effect on soul-sensitive beings, and understood the mechanism. I crouched next to one and used the dagger to cut the hind leg free. 2 pieces of material came off separately, the skinned leg meat for 3 points and the energy-conducting bone claw for 25. The scorpion tail, cut off entirely, gave 35. These shadow scorpion-tailed weasels use psychic power to channel energy through their bone claws and tail spurs. Those materials were worth considerably more than the creatures themselves. I worked through all 9 carcasses, spending careful time with the dagger to keep each piece clean. The one I had stabbed repeatedly was too damaged for the tail, but still had usable claws. The harvesting totals accumulated: 16 pieces of hind leg meat at 3 points each, for 48, 18 bone claws across 9 weasels at 25 points per pair for 450, and 8 intact tails at 35 points each for 280. With the 1 point remaining from before, my survival points sat at 779. I listed the stripped remains on the market, the carcasses missing hind legs and claws, but still containing the meat the harvesting buyer might want to finish themselves. The listing description that generated automatically for those was somewhat embarrassing. I posted in the regional channel that fresh shadow scorpion-tailed weasel remains were listed, that the meat was still intact for harvesting. First come, first served. Then I scrolled the channel for any intelligence worth keeping and saw several references to a fog appearing in the city ruins, and at least one survivor going silent mid-conversation with another after reporting the fog. I filed that away. Back at the tree I had used as my platform, I climbed up using the notches I had cut earlier and examined what the bone spurs had done to the frame I had built. Nearly every branch had been pierced, some of them almost all the way through. I pried one out with the dagger to examine it. Blunt tip, no sharp edges at all, not a weapon by conventional measure. Its lethality was entirely in the psychic discharge it carried. The system declined to award any points for single spurs. A handful recovered together came in as a trace amount worth 1 point. I spent the rest of the night sitting upright in the fork of the tree, not attempting sleep, listening to the forest settle around me. The sounds were strange, but no second attack came. I understood why. I had walked out of the digging ratworm territory earlier without knowing it, and the dissected weasel carcasses left on the ground were apparently keeping other scavengers at a respectful distance from my general area. Dawn arrived in the double light of the purple and blue stars shifting to their daytime position. I climbed down, drank half a bottle of purified water from storage, and felt the fog of sleep deprivation burn off somewhat. My survival points had climbed further overnight. All the weasel remains I had listed had sold. My balance was 940 points, just short of 1,000. A private message had come in from 12039 asking if I had any more complete shadow scorpion-tailed weasel materials, specifically wanting a full set of 4 claws and a tail. I replied that a set of 4 claws and 1 tail would cost 150 points. The other party did not respond immediately, which was fine. I had more immediate priorities. I needed a ranged weapon. The crude combat dagger had proved its value at close range in the dark last night, but relying on melee combat permanently was a ceiling I needed to break through. I opened the crafting interface and searched for bolter weapons on instinct, the reflex of someone who had spent too much time with the material. The results were thorough and mostly inaccessible. The cheapest bolt weapon was a bolt pistol rated for Astra-military and political commissars, holding 5 rounds of 13.9mm bolts, the recoil of which would fracture an unenhanced wrist, priced at 1,200 points with ammunition at 10 points per round sold separately. At the other end of the list was a master-crafted gilded composite bolt gun built by Terran artisans, designed for space marines, firing 19.7mm bolts with 3 optional underslung weapons. Impressive and entirely irrelevant. Laser weapons were more realistic for Immortal's physique. After comparing options, I settled on a laser shotgun, an illegal Hive City modification that increased a laser pistol's power and diffused the energy beam to hit multiple targets at close range. 2 lenses and a power amplifier made it bulky enough to hold with both hands rather than one. The range dropped below 50 meters and accuracy was poor, but within that range it could cover a wide area without precise aiming. Its main weakness was a high failure rate. I selected the master-crafted manufacturing option before confirming. The price climbed from 700 to 900 points. I pressed manufacture. The weapon that appeared in my storage was no more than 40 centimeters long and surprisingly heavy. The original laser pistol was unrecognizable in it. The body had been elongated with heat sinks added, an alloy grip attached below the muzzle, and coil assembly and lenses visible just inside the barrel. On the capacitor at the rear end, a string of high Gothic characters had been inlaid in gold wire. The system description told me a master craftsman had apparently made this after losing a bet while drunk, regretting it for the rest of his life, but in doing so had upgraded the focuser and scattering lens, added a variable barrel that allowed switching between scatter and focus modes, and significantly reduced the failure rate that made standard laser shotguns unreliable. In scatter mode, the lethal range was 30 meters. In focus mode, 800 meters with better performance still in vacuum. I activated the weapon through the button beside the trigger guard and felt the static charge raise the hair on my arms. I aimed at the tree where I had slept and pulled the trigger. More than a dozen beams of light erupted from the muzzle and hit the trunk in a cluster pattern, scorching holes 15 centimeters deep and setting small fires at several points. I switched the mode lever and fired again in focus mode. A single thick beam punched straight through the trunk and continued into a second tree further back before spending itself. Both shots together had consumed half the magazine. In scatter mode, the weapon fired 4 times per magazine. In focus mode, 3 times. The message from 12039 arrived while I was examining the scorch pattern. They were willing to pay but wanted to offer a diamond in partial trade, attaching its description. I checked my system and found that the diamond-tipped warhead design of standard bolt rounds used diamond as a key component, the material shattering on detonation to produce shrapnel inside the target. A small fragment of diamond was not immediately useful to me but had a potential future value. I replied that I wanted 120 points plus the diamond or no deal, and waited. The other party agreed. The diamond arrived in my storage as a small cluster of translucent crystals. The transaction fee was 1 point, deducted from my end despite having intended it to fall on the buyer's side. The annoyance was minor but noted. I added 12039 to my contact list. My balance after receiving 119 points of the agreed amount and paying the fee came to 159. I spent 50 points immediately on a standard laser pistol magazine for the shotgun. The new magazine showed a full energy indicator when I swapped it in. The old depleted magazine, I placed on the ground outside my storage in a patch of indirect light, curious whether the liquid metal core cell's solar charging function would work under alien stars. If it did not, I would try heating it over a fire later. I cut a thin strip from the spare crude ration block and mixed it into a water bottle to make a consumable paste, the only way to make the thing edible, and forced it down with several mouthfuls of clean water. The taste remained genuinely awful. I looked at the pieces of harvested shadow scorpion-tailed weasel hind leg meat in my storage and felt the contrast sharply. Properly cooked meat would be 100 times better. Finding a water source to process the meat properly was today's first objective, alongside exploring the boundary between the forest and the desert. I returned the depleted magazine to my back pocket to see how much charge the strange light overhead could restore, and started walking. I settled my weight onto the branch and brought the laser shotgun up level with my eyes, pressing the stock end against my cheek the way I had seen people do with rifles, even though this weapon had no stock, and the grip was all wrong for it. Without sights, I had to line the barrel up by eye, and at 40 meters the wolf pack was still lounging around the carcass they had been eating, watching me with irritated yellow eyes rather than charging. I pulled the trigger. The scatter mode beam spread badly at that range, and the dozen threads of light hit mostly sand, leaving small dark glass spots where grains melted under the heat. 2 of the shots caught flesh anyway, one burning a foreleg to bare blackened bone beneath the fur, and another slicing a wide cauterized wound across a rib cage. And the pain finished what the warning had started. All 7 razorback wolves abandoned the carcass and came for me at once, moving faster than anything that size had any right to move, yellow streaks covering 40 meters in the time it took me to breathe once. I held until they were inside 30 meters, counted the clusters of bone blade silhouettes converging, and fired again. At that range, the beams formed a near-solid net, and the 4 wolves running in the lead had nowhere to be that was not inside it. The energy threads punched through fur and muscle and went on, leaving neat charred channels, and the forward momentum carried the bodies another few meters before they stopped. The log refreshed 4 times at 30 points each. The remaining 3 wolves did not slow, and they did not try to jump. They ran at the trunk of my tree and turned sideways at the last moment, the slanted bone blades on their backs striking the wood like axes. The sound was not the crack of impact I expected. It was something deeper, a tearing as if the blades were parting the grain of the wood rather than splitting it. And chips the size of my palm sprayed outward. 3 passes and the tree tilted. I stopped trying to aim and pointed the muzzle approximately downward, clutching the branch with my other hand as the world began to lean. 1 wolf was positioning for another run, and the scattered beams caught it fully, shredding it, but I had no way to fire a 4th time because I was already falling. I let go of the branch on instinct, wrapped both arms around the laser shotgun to keep it from flying clear, and hit the fallen canopy in a tangle of broken branches. The impact drove everything out of my lungs and made bright points appear at the edge of my vision. I lay still for several seconds, getting air back while something moved in the leaves around me. The magazine I had tucked in my back pocket was gone when I reached for it, lost somewhere in the fall. The energy bar on the grip showed red. I spent 50 survival points on a new magazine from the system and swapped it in without standing up, then started crawling toward the gap the last scatter shot had punched through the canopy when I blasted the 3rd wolf at point-blank range. 20 meters ahead through a tear in the branches I could see the sandy ground at the forest edge, and I was nearly through when I came out of the leaves entirely and saw what was standing there. It was over 2 meters tall and built like a small armored vehicle. The shape was roughly a bear's, the proportions were a bear's, but the surface was wrong. A thick grayish-brown cuticle crossed with old scratches and dried patches of something. More rock face than skin, no neck to speak of, no visible ears, a pair of slit pupil eyes sitting deep in the skull and glinting with something between curiosity and appetite. Its forelimbs were enormous, each one ending in 5 short claws, whose tips caught the alien sunlight in a way that obsidian does. Its right foreclaw was currently holding the last surviving razorback wolf by the belly, the way you might hold something you were about to eat, and that is exactly what it did, tipping the wolf into its mouth and biting down until I heard bone. It pulled the dorsal bone blade free with one practiced motion and dropped it on the ground. Then it turned its slit eyes toward me. I raised the laser shotgun and fired on scatter mode when it was 10 meters out, aiming for the head. Most of the beams hit the shoulder instead and left charred marks on that rock-like carapace, wisps of black smoke rising from shallow scorches in the outer layer only. The pain made it angrier and nothing else. It dropped to all fours and came at a speed that made the ground shudder, and I ran. I used trees as obstacles, cutting left and right between trunks too thick for it to plow through, which forced it to dodge and cost it distance. I fired back twice while running and hit its chest and forelimbs with stray shots that only irritated it further. My legs felt like lead and my lungs were burning, and the gap between us was closing with every second. And then I stopped, dropped to one knee beside the widest trunk I could reach, pressed the barrel against the bark to steady the shaking in my hands, and switched the mode lever to focus. I felt the lens assembly shift and heard the hum sharpen. The beast had adjusted its path to come at me from the side to avoid the tree I was using as cover, and it was in the air when I pulled the trigger. A beam considerably thicker and brighter than anything the scatter setting produced erupted from the muzzle and hit it in the upper half of its head. The forward momentum stopped. Leaves came down. I pressed myself against the tree trunk and waited, and when I looked around the edge, there was a body on the ground with most of its head simply gone, the scorched lower jaw steaming, and nothing above that. The log updated with 500 survival points. I sat against the tree for several minutes doing nothing useful except getting my heart rate back below something dangerous. When I could stand without shaking badly, I spent 20 points on a bottle of mineral water from the market and drank it standing over the Chuyen tyrant carcass, reading its name off the log entry. Then I crouched down and drew my dagger. A voice came from the trees to my left, a woman's voice. Speaking Korean, tinged with surprise. She asked if someone was there and whether I was still alive. I put the dagger away and pulled the laser shotgun back out and lay down on top of the Chuyen tyrant using it as cover. Scanning the tree line. The survival stories I had read at work always delivered a loyal companion immediately after the protagonist's first major fight. That was fiction. In the actual survival situation I was in, someone hearing gunfire and approaching represented either opportunity or threat, and I was not in a position to bet on which. I called out demanding a name and serial number. A slender figure shifted behind a tree trunk about 30 meters into the forest, her pale blue tracksuit visible between the branches despite her apparent attempt at concealment. I aimed at a different tree of similar thickness beside her and fired the focus mode beam through it cleanly, then told her the next shot would be at the one she was actually hiding behind. She stepped out with both hands raised, her expression cycling between fear and transparent shock at the size of the animal I was lying on. She said her name was MU and her serial number was 44919. She asked if I was a survivor too, and the question struck me as optimistically credulous in a way that made me revise my threat assessment slightly downward. I told her it was a foolish question and walked around behind her to check the object hanging at her waist, which turned out to be a compact hand crossbow with a loaded bolt magazine. I did not lower the laser shotgun. When I came within 3 or 4 meters of her, I watched her face change in a way that could not be performed. The color drained out of it in seconds and her breathing quickened, and then she told me very urgently to stop coming closer. Her status interface, she said, had just thrown up a new debuff called Energy Field Interference, describing a powerful anti-psionic void that was suppressing her perception and decaying her mental power, producing nausea and dizziness. She compared the sensation to falling into water with a hangover. She crouched and put both hands on the ground and asked whether I was carrying something. I already knew what it was. The untouchable attribute I had mostly stopped thinking about in the business of surviving was doing exactly what the source material said it would, generating an anti-psionic field that was devastating to soul-sensitive beings. MU was not a psyker exactly, but her soul sensitivity was apparently high enough to be picked up by the null field. I told her to send me her main panel and status interface through the private message system, gave her my serial number, and backed away to a distance of 5 meters while she did it. The screenshot she sent matched my own system's layout exactly, confirming the mutation was confined to the manufacturing and exchange interface. The debuff description in her panel was detailed, noting that her personal space might malfunction within the interference range, and that items retrieved could be lost. I stared at that line for a moment and thought about the failed personal backpack activation on my own first day, and understood the mechanism completely. I had not activated a personal backpack because I did not have a soul to connect it to. At 5 meters distance, Mu's color came back slowly. The expression that settled on her face when she looked at me was composed of fear, wariness, and a revulsion she was clearly not responsible for, and just as clearly could not suppress. She had picked up a weapon attachment and basic survival gear, had navigated the forest alone to this area, and was managing her situation without obvious panic. I noted all of that without comment. I told her she could go, that I had nothing to offer her, and that her presence complicated mine, and I meant both things. She started to leave and then stopped. She asked if I had found any water source, a river or stream. I told her I was looking for exactly that, and offered her 2 pieces of raw meat in exchange for a direction. She hesitated the way someone does when they are weighing whether information is their only leverage, and then she pointed and said to walk straight ahead from my current position for approximately an hour to reach a small river. I cut a direction marker into the ground with my dagger, then took 2 pieces of peeled razorback weasel leg meat from storage and tossed them toward her feet. She stepped back, keeping her distance, and collected them from the ground, checked the system description, stored them in her personal space, and was gone into the trees within a minute. I kept watch on that direction until I was satisfied there was no one moving in it, then turned back to Tzu Tyrant. The creature was too heavy to move. I found the damage the laser had done to its cuticle on the shoulder and inserted the dagger tip into the burned edge as a starting point, and the resistance was enough that sparks flew where blade met carapace. This material was nothing like the weasels or the wolves. It was closer to prying apart plate armor. I went through the crude dagger in the first few minutes, bending it until the metal at the spine began to deform, and put it back in storage. My balance was 729 points. I opened the system interface and bought the Imperial Standard Combat Dagger with Fine Craftsmanship selected, which brought the cost to 400 points, and dropped my balance to 329. The dagger that appeared in my hand was covered in interlocking V-shaped metal patterns and was heavier than the crude version, and its description told me it had been forged from trace amounts of adamantium powder and ceramite particles, and could pierce a Space Marine ceramite armor, with a note suggesting the material had probably come from someone's chainsword teeth. I read that twice and decided it was exactly the sort of thing an ADMECH craftsman would write. The sharpness was a different category entirely. I had to reduce my force immediately because the first stroke nearly cut through the carapace plate rather than separating it from the flesh beneath. Working carefully along the lines of the body, tilting the blade flat between hide and muscle to keep the material intact, I peeled off the first full-sized piece, and received 180 points for it. The first piece I had already cut multiple channels into came off as damaged material, and gave 80 points. I worked through the rest of the body for the next hour, producing 2 intact large hides and 2 damaged ones for a total of 520 points from the hide alone, plus 150 from the forepaw claws and 50 from the hind paw meat pads, plus 15 from a large chunk of meat I cut away from the now stripped carcass. By the time I stripped off my bloodied clothes and used cut cloth to wipe myself down before buying a fresh set from the market for 30 points, my balance had reached 1,124. I sat for a few minutes reviewing equipment. The master-crafted laser shotgun handled range combat within its range effectively, and the new combat dagger had just demonstrated its capability at close quarters. What I lacked was physical durability. One more exchange with something the size of the Tzu Tyrant, without armor, and I would not survive the incidental damage even if I won the fight. I looked at the protective gear list, and understood immediately why most survivors would not be purchasing any of it. The standard Astra Militarum 2-piece flak armor set ran 1,300 points and weighed 5 or 6 kilograms on top of the already considerable weight of the weapons I was carrying. The full carapace armor sets ran over 5,000 points and weighed more. I kept scrolling and found what I needed at the bottom of the list. A light flak armor lining woven from nanofibers for 180 points and flak plates made from ceramite fragments and alloy for 80 points. I bought both and spent a few minutes pressing the plates into the slots in the lining and sealing them with the built-in fastening system. The result covered my torso and weighed barely more than a kilogram, offering meaningful protection against ballistic small arms and some resistance to energy weapons at oblique angles. It was not impressive compared to what the list contained, but it was what I could carry. 340 points spent, 784 remaining. I looked at the gene enhancement drug entry I had scrolled past earlier and spent 500 of those points on the food additive canister. The contents were a pale yellow crystalline powder smelling of sour cheese, and the instructions were that a squad's single meal portion would be what I should take per dose over 10 meals. I poured approximately 1/10 of the powder into my palm and swallowed it dry. The burning started immediately, a violent heat expanding through my mouth and throat that sent me to my knees on the ground involuntarily, and I drained the rest of my purified water to put it out. I sat on the ground in the dirt, and the blood smell from the dismembered carcass, waiting for the burning to fade, and thought about the fact that this particular misery would repeat itself 9 more times. When I could stand and walk without difficulty, I put the flak armor on over my fresh clothes, oriented myself using the direction mark I had cut into the ground, and set off toward where Mu had said the river was. The absence of any animals on either bank should have been reassuring. It was not. A river running along the desert boundary in that kind of heat should have had every creature in range drinking from it at dawn, and the sand on the desert side was bare, no tracks except old and wind-smoothed ones, no birds on the stones, no insects at the waterline. The bank on my side dropped half a meter down to the water, and the mud and rocks near the waterline were covered in tooth marks and deep parallel grooves, some of them big enough that I could put my fist in and still have room. I did not approach the edge. I picked up a fist-sized stone and threw it toward the middle of the current. The water erupted before the stone had finished sinking, dark shapes converging from multiple directions with a speed that made the impact of the stone look like bait. Long, narrow bodies and mouths full of file-like teeth, snapping in the foam. I watched the stone get reduced to gravel and backed a step further from the bank. Then I found a lower stretch, where erosion had cut the drop down to about 10 centimeters, and the current slowed, tossed stones near the edge to draw the strange fish in close, and stepped back as one of the larger ones, nearly 2 meters long, lunged entirely out of the water and hit the bank. I moved aside, let it thrash back into the current, and repeated until the repeated impacts had collapsed a section of the bank into a shallow fan of sand and mud, where the water was only a few centimeters deep. The large fish could not enter that. I went into the forest and cut a section of trunk, flattened one end into a bevel and rounded the other into a grip, and came back to use it as a shovel to dig a narrow canal from the collapsed section 5 or 6 meters inland to a small pit. The work took less time than the caution required to do it safely, watching the water for any sign of movement toward me. When the pit filled, I scooped some into an empty plastic bottle and checked the system description. Murky river water with most suspended solids settled. Drinkable after boiling. Low probability of gastrointestinal discomfort without it. No fatal designation. I let out breath I had been holding for 10 minutes. I stripped off my clothes and the flak armor, used the bottle to pour water over myself in sections, and washed the remaining blood smell off my skin and out of my clothes. The bloody runoff going back into the current set the strange fish thrashing with excitement. I put the flak armor back on over bare skin, which was uncomfortable, and started a fire in the stones near the trees using a lighter I bought from the market for 5 points. While the water boiled in the iron pot, I skewered the leg meat on thin sticks and propped them over the coals. By the time the meat was done, I was barely staying awake, but I did not allow myself to lie down on the ground. The first bite burned me because I had been too impatient. I dropped the skewer into the warm boiled water in the pot to cool the grease off, tore away the charred outer layer, and ate. There was no seasoning, and the texture was fibrous, but the hunger that rose up the moment I tasted actual cooked food was something I had not felt since arriving. A deep physical demand that went past comfort into necessity. I ate most of what I had cooked without stopping, then drank the greasy broth left in the pot, then sat by the diminishing fire and felt exhausted in a way that the adrenaline of the day had been covering. My status panel showed a new effect alongside the usual readouts, indicating that routine genetic enhancement was underway at 14%, with muscle and nerve tissue receiving basic reinforcement. A second effect explained the hunger. The enhancement agent was putting my body into an accelerated state, increasing the efficiency of energy absorption from food and demanding more of it in the process. I had eaten enough for 2 ordinary meals and still felt like I had only just managed to satisfy the demand. I bottled 2 portions of the greasy water from the pot and listed them on the market as contaminated water for 10 points each, then refilled the pot with clean river water from the pit and let it boil again while my clothes dried near the coals. When the second pot was ready, I put it in storage and climbed a tree with thick enough branches that I did not need to build a frame, tied the hemp rope under my arms and around the trunk above me, and slept properly for the first time since arriving on the endless continent. The fire burned down on its own below me, and I had put the spent energy magazines in it to charge before I climbed. I woke to an alarm. The system had pushed a set of alerts that I had apparently slept through when they first arrived, 6 hours earlier, and the stack showed adaptation period complete. A large-scale psionic storm forming, 18 standard hours, until it affected all areas. Warning of mental erosion and chaos energy invasion for anyone remaining in open terrain. Note that some survivors might gain power while others would become twisted. And a safe zone beacon activation directing all survivors to indicated positions. A compass overlay appeared in the upper right of my vision. A semi-transparent circular indicator with a small center point for my position, and 6 needles arranged across green, yellow, and red rings, showing distance by their width. 3 needles pointed into the forest behind me. 1 yellow and 2 red pointed into the desert. The chat channel was a flood of panic and bargaining for information, survivors reporting dead contacts and strange creatures, and asking what a psionic storm actually was. I ate the last of the cooked meat from storage while reading it, and found one piece of useful intelligence confirming that a wider needle meant a shorter distance to that beacon. I checked the needles. The one in the red zone pointing into the desert was nearly 4 times as wide as any of the forest needles, and one of the 2 green desert needles was roughly aligned with it. I had started 6 hours after everyone else. The nearest red zone beacon in the desert was further than the forest options, but my null field would protect me from the storm itself, which meant the danger of a red zone was probably a better wager than arriving at a green zone 6 hours behind the population already sheltering there. I untied myself from the trunk, retrieved the energy magazines from the ashes, and walked into the desert. The heat was the same as before, the alien sunlight beating off the sand hard enough that I kept my collar up over my nose and mouth. A pack of razorback wolves crossed my path an hour in, moving fast and ignoring me entirely, their instincts apparently overriding the predatory impulse in front of whatever they were fleeing. I watched them go and kept walking. The sky was darkening earlier than it should have for the time of day, something changing in the light, and the wind carried a new quality that I could not name, a kind of pressure that was not temperature or humidity. After several hours, the 2-star light had shifted, and the system pushed a 6-hour warning. The widest compass needle, the red one, was pointing at a series of large rolling dunes ahead, and it had gotten even wider. I crested the highest dune and stopped. In the basin below, buried to its midpoint in the sand, was the wreckage of something so large that my first instinct was to look for a reference scale and find none. The exposed portion of the hull was twisted and burned, dull metallic gray covered in impact craters and tears. Gun barrel structures snapped at their midpoints and turret housings ripped open. Armor plate had peeled and curled back to show cabling and internal structures long since dead. The circular nozzles at one end tilted toward the sky like they had been driven headfirst into the ground at speed. I could not see a matching forward section, and could not tell whether it was buried deeper or had separated before impact. At the stern end, still partially intact above the sand level, was a Gothic-style spire cathedral rising from the hull plating. I recognized the architectural language immediately. There was only one design tradition in my cultural reference that produced warships with cathedrals built into the hull. I stood at the top of the sand ridge and looked down at it and said a quiet address to the emperor above, out of reflex rather than belief, and then slid down into the basin. The air near the wreck smelled of metallic corrosion and old ozone mixed with machine oil. Fragments of hull material were scattered across the sand, some of them carrying carved text or stylized religious imagery. I walked the perimeter first, checking for chaos markings, flesh growth, tentacle structures, or bone formations that would indicate a corrupted ship, and found none. The Imperial Aquila appeared on several surfaces, covered in dried black stains but recognizable. The Mechanicus skull and gear sigil appeared near what had been the engine section. I found a hull breach where the plating had been torn back by some enormous force, leaving a gap large enough to walk through with the laser shotgun raised, and went in. The interior was dark and quiet. My flashlight cut through corridors lined with shattered screens and broken pipes, dust thick enough on the floor that my footsteps left clear prints. I could not read High Gothic, and the hatch markings were meaningless to me, so I followed the compass needle, which still pointed deeper into the wreck. The first thing I found on the corridor floor was ammunition, several large-caliber bolt rounds with the Imperial Aquila visible on the casings, plus empty magazines and scattered cases. I checked the system description on the intact rounds, confirmed they were 19.7mm Astartes bolt rounds at 15 points each in the exchange list. Found an empty Astartes magazine on the floor to use as a container, and collected 7 complete rounds before I had covered the immediate area. I stood up and my head bumped into something. I turned the flashlight upward and almost fired on reflex. A figure in purple power armor hung in the corridor, at head height, pinned to the bulkhead through the abdomen by a massive two-handed longsword. The armor was 2 meters tall, even sagging forward on the blade, and the surface was covered in filth and damage. The originally exquisite carvings obscured by pink slime and what looked like small living tentacles dried to stiffness. The helmet was bowed, the body leaning forward, so that the faceplate was precisely where my head had been. I recognized the Legion markings, Emperor's Children, Slanesh-devoted traitors, and fired 2 scatter shots into the eye lenses anyway before I was willing to accept it was dead. Both shots hit and something inside the helmet burned. The body did not move. I spent another full magazine switch firing 2 focused shots through the faceplate until I could see scorched material through the holes and still nothing moved, and then I approached the longsword. The weapon was massive, sized for a space marine, a broad blade and a long hilt that my hands could only grip 1/3 of. The system identified it as a foe-breaker 2-handed power sword, damaged, with its disruption field generator broken and unable to be activated, but its base material hardness and sharpness still far exceeding any mortal weapon. Worth 42,000 points in the exchange list. Crafting conditions not met. I grabbed the hilt with both hands, planted my feet on the dead traitor's torso for leverage, and pulled until my face went red without moving it. I adjusted my grip and tried again, and the sword shifted slightly with a sound combining metal grinding and tearing tissue, then tilted, and the weight of the Chaos Space Marine's armor, over a ton, pulled the whole assembly off the wall. I let go and scrambled backward, and the corpse hit the floor with a concussive thud that shook dust from the ceiling. The sword came free with the fall, and I stepped on the body for balance and got both hands around the hilt and pulled it out properly, then put it into storage immediately before the weight could take it down across my legs. I replaced the expended energy magazine and continued following the compass needle deeper into the ship. Fresh blood on the floor stopped me. Everything before this point had been old stains, black with age. These were bright red, still wet, tracking deeper into the corridor with messy footprints alongside them. I crouched and moved the flashlight across both ends of the passage, holding the laser shotgun forward. The prints were human-sized with a distinct tread pattern. Not an Astartes, not an animal. The trail led around a corner and I followed it with the muzzle first. Mu was slumped against the corridor wall at the end of the trail, her light blue tracksuit soaked through with blood from wounds across her torso. Her abdomen had been torn open, one hand broken with bone visible. Her face twisted and her eyes wide in the expression of someone who had seen something in their last moments that their mind could not contain. The crossbow at her waist was gone, replaced by a twisted mass of plastic and metal bolts on the floor nearby. I stood for a moment looking at her and felt the cold weight of it. The contrast between her apparent competence at surviving alone and this outcome. I checked the items scattered around the blood pool. She had found the razorback wolf carcasses I had left behind, and her personal space had emptied when she died, producing wolf meat, 6 razorback wolf bone blades, 2 bottles of purified water, a box of anti-inflammatory medication, and 2 bars of chocolate. I put all of it in storage. The footprint at the edge of the pool was human-sized, with a neat tread pattern and had been pressed into the blood deliberately enough to leave a clean impression. Whatever had killed Mu walked on 2 legs, was strong enough to tear a person apart with its hands, and had stepped in the blood after the fact. I did not linger. The compass needle pulled me away from her and further into the ship. The corridor opened into a large hall with yellow warning lights cycling on the ceiling, casting a shifting amber glow over everything. Several heavy metal covers had been set up as barricades along one wall, their surfaces cratered with old bullet impacts. Thick cables hung from the ceiling like dead vines, and at the ends of some of them, blue electrical arcs jumped and crackled, indicating that part of the ship's power system was still running somewhere deep in the hull. The floor was covered in dried blackened stains and scorch marks, but the air was clear, ventilation still operating. The compass needle that had guided me since the desert edge disappeared completely when I stepped into this hall. I had just started moving toward the far wall to look for a defensible corner when something metallic struck something else metallic in the shadows across the hall from me. I brought the laser shotgun up and swept the flashlight toward the sound. A hatch opened on the far side and a shape emerged from the corridor behind it, moving with heavy, uncoordinated steps that made a grinding sound with every stride. It was roughly humanoid, about 1.7 meters tall, but wrong in ways that became clearer as the flashlight found it. The left side of its body was rusted metal framework and exposed gears with broken wires sparking at the joints, and the right side was covered in dark reddish flesh that pulsed visibly, wrapping the mechanical skeleton in what looked like parasitic growth. Nerve-like bundles and small tentacles coiled around its mechanical arm. The head was split between a dim red optical sensor on the left and a sarcoma growth with a pupil at its center on the right. A fleshy tentacle hung from the metal jaw and occasionally brushed against the voxcaster embedded in its mouth, producing static. It spoke in a voice that mixed electronic tones with biological sounds, declaring identification failures and unauthorized access and pain. And then the red light in its mechanical eye flared and it launched itself across the hall at me. I knew what it was. A servitor, imperial labor and labor servant construct, but this one had been left in the ship during or after whatever chaos contact had occurred here, and the warp contamination had warped the flesh components into something that should not still be moving. I pulled the trigger on scatter mode at close range before the thought was finished. The beams hit it across the chest, punching charred pits through the metal plating and vaporizing sections of the fleshy growth on the other side. The smell was burning metal and something biological and wrong. The impact slowed it but did not stop it. I retreated behind one of the heavy covers, continued firing while it followed, and spent 2 full magazines burning holes through it systematically, before a focused shot through the sarcoma eye on its head extinguished whatever was sustaining it. It stood for a moment and then dropped to the floor with a concussive clang. The system awarded 450 survival points for the kill, then pushed a secondary prompt. Damaged servitor wreckage had been detected, repairable, requiring new intact biomass components. Plasteel, bioplastic, and biomass circulation fluid, for 920 points total. The result would be a servitor calibrated for the user, capable of following basic commands. I looked at the twisted pile of metal and burned flesh on the floor for a long moment. My balance was 734 points, below the cost of the repair, but a servitor that could carry weight, stand watch, and handle physical tasks requiring more strength than I had was worth considerably more than 920 points in practical terms over the time ahead of me. The limiting factor was the biomass component requirement, and I already knew what the only available source was. I went back for MU. The passage was exactly as I had left it, except that it was not. I came around the corner expecting the scene I had memorized, and found instead that the miscellaneous items scattered around the blood pool were gone. The blood on the floor showed footprints pressed into the dried clots, and MU's body had been moved. She was no longer slumped against the wall in the posture of violent death, but had been laid flat in the center of the pool, face up. Her eyes had been closed. The twisted expression of terror was still there, but the open-eyed quality of it was gone. The torn clothing on her chest had been arranged to cover the wounds, and her broken hand had been folded across her chest over her intact one. The whole arrangement had a quality that was not clinical and not random, something that suggested someone had done this carefully and deliberately. I called out loudly asking who was there, and covered both ends of the corridor with the laser shotgun. Nothing answered. I held the position for several minutes. The only sounds were my own breathing, and the distant crackle of the arcing cables in the hall behind me. Whoever had done this was either gone, or choosing not to answer, and the footprints in the blood were the same human-sized tread pattern I had seen before. Not the servitor. Something else was in this ship. I put the laser shotgun away, and crouched beside MU's body. I told her quietly that circumstances forced this, and that I hoped whatever came next for her was better than rotting in a dark corridor, and I meant both things. Then I put my hand on her and issued the storage command, and her body disappeared from the dried blood. I went back to the hall at a run, and did not slow down until I was inside the amber-lit space again. I spent the selling proceeds that had accumulated in my balance, which the market had cleared while I was moving, and brought my total to 1,229 points. I went to the servitor wreckage, and selected repair. The process was quiet and systematic and disturbing to watch. Lin Yu's body was drawn out of storage by some mechanism in the system and floated beside the servitor wreckage. A pale blue scanning beam enveloped both of them, and then the reconstruction began. The servitor's damaged components straightened, the rust and twisted structures correcting themselves as if time were running backward on the metal. Then the same process started on MU, and it was not healing, it was something entirely different and more efficient and colder. Lines appeared on her body. Components were separated with precision I could not track. Her head retained above the chest. The skull opened and neural bundles inserted. The flesh of her chest and arms stripped and blended with plasteel and bioplastic to fill the corrected metal framework. Nerves were separated and fused with cables. Everything that was not functionally necessary was removed. The ADMECH design philosophy of wasting nothing extended to every gram of biological material. When the blue light dissipated, a servitor stood in the center of the hall. Its face was covered by long metal strips where the cheek muscles had been, its mouth replaced by a speaker assembly. Red light from artificial eyes regarded me steadily. A cold electronic voice reported that its service protocol had rebooted, that new authorization was confirmed, and that it was standing by. It identified itself as U3342. I looked at it for a moment, then looked away, then thought about what the Adeptus Mechanicus designed these things to be, and concluded that any discomfort I felt about the process was a sentiment the culture that built this system had never entertained, and that the practical question was what orders to give. I filed the rest under the cost of survival and moved on. The storm arrived while I was still considering my next step. A system alert appeared across my vision, which I had been expecting. What I had not expected was the physical sensation. Nothing. The hall around me was unchanged. U3342, standing 3 meters away, reported what it was seeing in the same flat electronic tone. Purplish-red warp energy flooding in from every direction, being deflected around a 5-meter sphere centered on my position. Psionic phenomena accumulating against an invisible barrier and failing to penetrate it. From inside the null field I could see none of it. I could see only the hall and the amber lights and the crackling cables. Same as before. The system prompt updated. A Geller field barrier had activated inside this area. I asked U3342 what the barrier was and it confirmed the identification, noting that a Geller field blocked warp energy but could be passed through physically. I asked whether we could cross it and it said yes, and I stepped toward the pale translucent surface that had materialized between me and the far corridor. The moment I crossed through it, the scene beyond the barrier changed completely, churning blue-purple mist filling the view outside the field, psionic light and strange arcs flickering within it, and something roaring at a frequency more felt than heard. I had stepped out of the null field range and left U3342 behind it. I registered this half a second too late, turned, and saw the servitor standing at the boundary of the anti-psionic field with frost and small scorch marks already forming on its surfaces, the warp energy outside the field eroding what the field was not protecting. I ran back out through the barrier and called the servitor to follow me. Its audio receptors were being scrambled by whatever was screaming in the warp around it, but it found my voice in the noise, and the moment I re-entered its range, the blue-purple mist it had been seeing vanished, and I was visible to it again. I led it through the Geller field barrier together, keeping it within range, and the erosion stopped immediately once we were both inside. We searched the enclosed area within the barrier and found nothing except the single passage at the far end sealed by a heavily jammed hatch. The door was thick metal, deformed by some immense impact into the frame, and I could not move it. I gave U3342 the order to open it. The servitor inserted its four-fingered alloyed palm into the deformed gap, its electronic muscle fibers engaging with an audible hum, and pried the hatch to half a person's width before it jammed completely. It reported instruction execution complete in the same tone it used for everything. The passage behind the hatch was devastated, the floor covered in carbonized stains and scattered metal that had once been weapons. I found the remains of what had been a boarding shield, rectangular, plasteel and ceramite composite, riddled with bullet holes that had spiderwebbed the material without piercing it. The structural integrity gone, but the raw material intact. I put it in storage. The description noted that the moment a shield bearer fell in a narrow corridor, the soldiers behind typically died in the next second from concentrated fire coverage. A cold remark. The passage ended at a secondary control room, a wider space with shattered consoles and bulkheads marked by both energy weapon scorches and kinetic impact craters. 3 long-handled battle axes with gear and skull motifs were scattered across the floor, their halves broken, their power field components too damaged to register any value. 3 figures in red robes were slumped over the control console, and through the bullet holes and scorch marks in the fabric, I could see that what lay beneath was not flesh in any ordinary sense. Mechanical augmentations, complex conduits and biological tissue so thoroughly mixed with metal that the boundary between them was impossible to locate. Tech priests. They weighed far more than ordinary people. I tried to turn one over and could not. I gave U3342 the order to move them to the floor face up and step back to watch. The servitor's alloy palm caught the first red-robed figure at the shoulder and pried it away from the console. Something fell from the robes as the body moved. It hit the floor and fired. A thick beam of bright blue light erupted from the fallen object and burned a clean circular hole half a meter across through the console. The metal at the edges instantly softened and dripping, the air filling with the smell of vaporized metal and dense ozone. The beam lasted less than a second. I was already against the wall with the laser shotgun raised by the time it ended. On the floor near the newly made hole was a pistol. Compact, smooth-lined, dark gray metal body with black composite grip panels. A short, thick barrel surrounded by a ring structure that still glowed faintly blue at the gaps. The plasma containment and acceleration assembly still charged. The decorative emblem on the hammer position was geometric lines forming an abstract star that looked nothing like the skulls and aquilas that covered everything else on this ship. I checked the system identification without touching it. Relic pattern plasma pistol. Origin from the dark age of technology. Performance comprehensively superior to current Imperial master-crafted plasma weapons while optimized for a mortal's weight and size requirements. Worth 42,000 survival points in the exchange list, no manufacturing conditions available. The standard Imperial pattern plasma pistol was 2,000 points and the master-crafted version was 2,800, which gave me some sense of what 42,000 meant in practical terms. The ammunition pricing was painful. Each extended energy cell held enough high-energy particles for 6 standard shots and cost 250 points, requiring specialized equipment to recharge once spent. I stared at that for a moment and then thought about the Chuyan Tyrant and the Chaos Space Marine and what a plasma weapon would have done to either of them, and bought an extended energy cell. The pending sales I had listed earlier all cleared while the purchase was processing and the system deducted 2 cells instead of 1, apparently interpreting the confirmation as applying to both. I checked the balance and found 2,139 points remaining, and I was too satisfied with the number to sustain any irritation about the extra cell. The magazine interface of the relic pistol matched the standard Imperial pattern, which made sense if the Imperial version was built as a copy of this older design. I loaded one of the extended cells, checked that it seated correctly, and stowed the plasma pistol in storage alongside the power sword and the laser shotgun. I had arrived on this continent in shorts with 2 survival points. The weapons in my storage were now worth more than most survivors on this continent would accumulate in weeks. I told U3342 to stop moving the tech priest corpses and considered whether there was anything more to do inside this control room while the psionic storm raged outside. My gaze moves to the other 2 tech priest corpses, and I feel fervor ignite behind my eyes. I tell you, 334, 2 to bring the remaining 2 bodies down, wait out the scraping sounds, then step back inside to find all 3 priests laid flat on the floor. Their mechanical bodies are riddled with damage, leaking machine oil and coolant and biological fluid, pale bones visible through rotted flesh, and the other 2 are clearly not as wealthy as the first. Most of the wreckage is useless, but prosthetics smashed and mechadendrites bent, but I find a few decent items. An intact bionic eye implant inside a shattered skull, and an intact laser cutter and 2 laser welding torches on the mechadendrites. Implanting the eye would require cranial surgery and 1,500 points from the system, and I have no interest in becoming a cowboy full of bionics, so I pocket it. After taking the torches, the remains collapse to a pile of twisted wreckage on the interface. I feel quite satisfied. A plasma pistol is something even an average imperial political commissar might not carry, and a relic weapon's value is likely comparable to that of an Astartes. I stow everything and lead you 3, 3, 4, 2 deeper through the passage into an open space that looks like a pipe hub, crisscrossing pipes and cables of varying thickness. Converging from all directions, the air thick with machine oil and rust and a musty odor from dead ventilation. The floor coated in viscous grime. Despite this being an Imperial warship that should have carried tens of thousands of mortal crew and naval armsmen, I have seen almost no standard-issue weapons or equipment belonging to ordinary soldiers. The boarding shield tells me a brutal boarding action did take place here. But where are the bones, the bulletproof vests, the weapons? Before I can settle that thought, a loud crash erupts from diagonally above. Something falls from a large pipe shaft and slams onto a thick pipe below, smashing a massive dent into it. My flashlight reveals another chaos-tainted servitor, worse condition than the last. Body twisted at an unnatural angle, bones and metal both broken, exposed cables hanging like dead snakes, white bone-like structures piercing through overgrown flesh. The impact has clearly destroyed all ability to move, blood of machine oil and dark slime gurgling from its wounds. I never believed there was only one rogue servitor here. I look up, but the shaft above is pure darkness. I order you 3342 to alert me of any approaching units and aim the laser shotgun at the shaft opening. The danger comes not from above, but from an adjacent shaft. Climbing and sliding sounds against metal pipes growing louder. I kill the flashlight and turn the barrel toward the shaft bottom, waiting in dim emergency lighting until something lands with a muffled thud. I snap the flashlight back on and illuminate a middle-aged man in his 40s. Thin, wearing torn oil-covered gray coveralls. His face a mix of terror and exhaustion, one hand shielding his eyes and the other held high. When I tell him not to move and that I will shoot, he immediately shouts back in Mandarin with a heavy accent, identifying himself as a survivor, begging me not to shoot, saying a machine monster is chasing him from behind and we should run. My muzzle does not waver. I demand his ID number and name. He answers anxiously. His name is Jang Jong Jonguk, Idaho 55801, and there are 5 of them in total. They arrived late to this safe zone, wandered following the compass, found a dead girl with a hole in her stomach and tidied her up. Could not find their group when they arrived, and when they asked over comms, their group said they had been here the whole time. He explains their safe zone was a workers' lounge with plenty of clothes, but the door would not close. Stone bears got in, then machine monsters started fighting each other, giving them their only chance to escape. They scattered, and he ended up climbing down the pipes. I add him to my system comms and ask him to recite my ID number back. He gets it right, 73481. His knowledge of MU's body confirms his story, and I relax slightly. The stone bears and machine monsters he describes are almost certainly Chu Yen tyrants and chaos-tainted servitors. I ask what weapons he has. He produces a rusted metal strip roughly sharpened into a blade, the handle wrapped in cloth strips. I look at the crude thing and then at my plasma pistol, momentarily speechless. Heavy, rapid clanging sounds come from above the shaft he climbed down, growing faster and louder. Jang Jianggonga turns pale. I tell him to retreat to the corner behind the thick pipes, then take position with you, 3342, covering the shaft. Another rogue servitor lands hard, similar to the first but with a sharpened section of metal pipe welded to one arm as a spear, its optical sensors flickering with unstable red light. It charges immediately toward me. You, 334. 2 lunges and its mechanical claws embed in the servitor's body and tear off a flesh-covered arm, faltering the charge. I fire the laser shotgun in focus mode. The beam strikes the head directly, destroys the biological brain, and the servitor collapses, still emitting fragmentary electronic sounds as it twitches and goes still. For an ordinary servitor, the head is the kill shot. My flashlight beam then illuminates you. 3, 3, 4, 2, and Jang Jianggonga gets a clear look at the half-mechanical, half-flesh face of MU. He lets out a shrill scream, sprints into the dark passage and leaves his crude blade on the ground without a second thought. The system logs 450 survival points for the chaos-tainted attendant servitor. I feel no impulse to chase after him. There may be more servitors, and acting blindly is too risky. I lead you. 3342 out quickly through a scorched corridor into the edge of a massive vertical shaft with bottomless darkness below. A rusted elevator platform with a closed metal gate stands before me. Gothic letters above read, Power Bay Elevator, no IV. The adjacent cogitator screen is still running on low power. The palm scan comes back denied, no authorized biological signature or Adeptus Mechanicus seal. I give up on the cogitator and pull the lever on the elevator's simple control panel. Chains grind from the darkness, and after about a minute, a heavy elevator car of thick metal plates and bars rises and halts. I step inside, U334, 2 follows, and I pull the lever downward. The car descends slowly through total darkness, metal grinding at an uncomfortable tilt, my flashlight occasionally catching broken pipes or massive wreckage through the bars. After several minutes, a faint steady blue light seeps through from below. The car slows and stops, and I involuntarily hold my breath. The space before me is an incredibly vast atrium buried inside the ship, over 100 meters in diameter, surrounded by metal platforms with pipes and cables, massive pillars supporting the entire structure. At the center of the cross-shaped walkway the car has delivered me to stands a magnificent device, arched metal structures rising from a base of cooling fins and complex coils. In between those arches, a deep blue plasma sphere only 2 or 3 meters across, slowly roiling and surging. The entire space is bathed in ghostly blue light and filled with the low hum of contained energy. U-334-2 confirms it. A nearly extinguished reactor still running. When I ask how it is still running on a ship crashed for who knows how long, U-334-2 points toward a corner near the shaft wall where several figures are moving stiffly, lifting things from a mound and tossing them onto a conveyor belt leading to the reactor's intake. By the ghostly blue glow, I can make out what they are burning. Twisted metal wreckage, pale bones, shattered armor, and weapons. I curse the waste internally. The plasma reactor is barely keeping itself operational this way, and the Geller field with it. We move along the massive circular corridor at the edge of the hull toward the mound. The corridor is scattered with weapon fragments and the traces of a tragic battle. The mound is composed of broken weapons, armor, bones, and miscellaneous trash, and 6 industrial servitors are busy with it. Different from you, 3342. These are severed at the waist and mounted on tracked chassis, one arm ending in a 3-tooth mechanical claw and the other in a laser cutter, heads encased in metal with respirators embedded in the flesh. Their movements are slow, their treads grinding with discordant sounds, clearly nearing the end of their lifespans, but they show no signs of chaos corruption. They have been working in this enclosed power core area, protected by the Geller field, running on preset programs. As long as they do not attack proactively, I have no reason to conflict with them. Destroying them might collapse the Geller field and the safe zone with it. My gaze moves to the mountain of fuel. The system's item identification tags let me pick out valuable targets from the chaos in minutes. 2 intact Mars Mk4 laser rifles and 1 heavy lumberjack gun adapted for Auburn bow needs, using .50 caliber solid armor-piercing rounds. I plan to use U-334-2 as a tripod for the lumberjack gun. Just as I drag the 3 weapons free from the scrap, an industrial servitor stops, turns its sensors toward me, and announces in a flat electronic voice that all materials here are sacred Imperial assets under technical custody regulation, and I must return the items immediately. I try explaining that they are going to be shredded and burned as fuel anyway, and that giving them to me is resource recycling, but the servitor replies that its logic chain cannot recognize the command. I gesture as if putting the things down, and, while placing the laser rifles at my feet, store all 3 weapons in my subdimensional storage. The servitor scans me, finds nothing, reports a logic conflict, and after a few seconds of failed attempts to query a superior unit, triggers some protection mechanism and returns to its workstation as if nothing happened. These old servitors cannot handle anomalies that exceed their underlying logic. I settle in a corner to eat roasted meat with gene enhancer powder and wait patiently for the servitors to reveal more goods from the depths, and I am just about to get up and look again when an earth-shattering explosion erupts from a nearby elevator shaft. The entire platform shakes violently, followed by metal twisting and snapping and the dull impact of something massive slamming hard onto the floor. Dense smoke pours from the collapsed shaft, and amid violent coughing 3 panicked figures scramble out. A baseball cap youth with a gash on his arm, a tall thin man leaning against the wall, and a third sitting on the ground clutching a leg bent at an unnatural angle. 2 of the industrial servitors move toward them, casting oppressive shadows, but the baseball cap youth and thin man scramble for the corridor without hesitation, while the injured man watches his companions flee and pleads for them not to leave him. The servitors roll past him without pausing and head straight for the damaged elevator shaft, determine it has no repair value, and begin dismantling it for fuel. The abandoned injured man eventually snaps out of his fear and limps after the others. I circle around and approach the 3 shaken survivors, asking which team they are from. They are not familiar with Jang Jeongguk. When the baseball cap youth notices you, 3342, he shouts a warning. I tell you, 334-2 to fall back, and the tall thin man stares in disbelief. The 3 explain. They found a warehouse-type safe zone and encountered a giant blue-skinned beast, nearly 3 meters tall with an ant-like head and compound eyes and massive mandible pincers like industrial shears. 5 of their 9 teammates were torn apart by it. They fled blindly, ran into servitors, found an elevator, and the elevator was destroyed halfway down, nearly killing them all. Before he finishes, a deafening tearing sound erupts from above. The deformed elevator shaft wall is torn open, and a massive figure nearly 3 meters tall crashes down onto the wreckage. Exactly the giant blue-skinned beast they described. Chitinous armor, mandible pincers opening and closing with a chilling sound. Compound eyes gleaming with ferocity. My pupils contract sharply. This thing's oppressive presence far surpasses the Chu Yan tyrant. I raise the plasma pistol and fire without hesitation. A searing blue beam hits the area between its mandible pincers and erupts into a blinding ball of light, and the beast lowered its head to take the impact head-on. It shakes its head, roars, and then its attention is seized by something stronger. It locks its compound eyes onto the plasma reactor at the center of the chamber, drawn by energy similar to the ion beam from my pistol, and ignores the humans entirely. Its hind limbs surge, and it launches itself headlong into the churning azure plasmasphere. The reactor-level energy engulfs the beast instantly, and its body visibly carbonizes and disintegrates in seconds. It struggles briefly and vanishes into the azure radiance, turned into additional fuel. A system log appears. 4,300 survival points for a killed juvenile. Ant ox. My eye twitches at the word juvenile. Ant oxes can tear through starship plating with their forelimbs, and a single adult can slaughter a small starship. I do not dare bet on how many expired Antox cans might still exist somewhere in this wreckage, or how long they have been expired. Everything happens too fast. The 3 survivors are still dazed by the plasma pistol and the Antox's suicide when the reactor's low hum suddenly turns sharp and piercing, its stability visibly declining. The indicator lights on the walls begin to flash wildly. The plasmasphere contracts sharply, and then the light within the containment field vanishes and the reactor shuts down entirely. Backup power activating with priority given to maintaining the Geller field in the core area and basic life support. The backup power will last 4 tera-hours. The electronic voice makes the announcement in Gothic, so only I understand it. The 3 survivors look bewildered, saying it sounded a bit like English and seeming like some kind of warning. 2 emergency task options surface in the vision of everyone in the area. Task 1, called Core Reboot, offers 5,000 survival points, a safe zone reboot, and an equipment crafting opportunity. The objective is to follow the industrial servitors to the lower deck, obtain and install spare parts to repair the reactor. Time limit 4 hours, with a warning that deeper and more dangerous areas will be involved. Task 2, called Preservation of the Spark, offers 1,500 survival points, a miniature Geller field generator, and a deep vehicle modification opportunity. The objective is to find and submit a functioning Geller field generator core, carry at least 1 intact core processing unit from a normal servitor, and reach the mid-deck broadside hangar to find or repair a usable vehicle, with a warning that this action will cause the safe zone to shrink or collapse. I look at the 2 options for only a moment and immediately feel the malice from the survival system. These 2 tasks have an obvious core conflict. Anyone choosing Task 2 stands directly opposed to those choosing Task 1, because taking the Geller field generator makes repairing the reactor meaningless. But this is a place with Antoxes. Waiting here until the psionic storm passes is seeking death. The only way out is the vehicle modification opportunity. I choose Task 2 immediately. The 3 survivors reach their consensus just as quickly. Task 1, repair the reactor. The tall, thin man speaks with a decisive tone and turns toward me, trying to win me over. Out of basic compassion, I tell them this place is not safe and will soon be overrun by far more dangerous things, and I suggest they choose Task 2 and leave immediately. The tall, thin man's voice suddenly rises, calling me crazy for wanting to actively dismantle the safe zone with a psionic storm outside, and the baseball cap youth backs him up. The 2 exchange a fierce glance and begin advancing toward me aggressively. They have already revealed they can casually abandon an injured companion, and these are not good people. When the tall, thin man pulls out a machete and swings at me and the baseball cap youth lunges with a dagger at my abdomen, a cold light enters my eyes. The plasma pistol fires. An explosion of azure light completely envelops the tall, thin man's upper body, instantly vaporizing the machete and half his torso. No wail, no scream. The dagger of the baseball cap youth does land on me, striking heavily against my ballistic plate, the tip breaking off cleanly. The nanofiber woven undersuit underneath cannot be cut through. U-3-3-4-2 reacts when the attack hits me and classifies the youth as a hostile, driving a heavy mechanical arm into his back, the claws piercing straight through him. Screaming erupts through the power bay. U-3-3-4-2 confirms it has dealt fatal damage, tears the not yet dead youth free from its arm, and tosses him aside. The body goes still with a series of gurgling sounds. Looking at the half-vaporized corpse I made myself, I feel nothing. Looking at the one U-3-3-4-2 tore apart, I feel the urge to vomit. Killing my own kind for the first time leaves complex emotions. The wounded man with the broken leg slumps to the floor and scrambles backward, and I have no interest in finishing him off. I suppress the churning in my stomach and tell you 3-3-4-2 to keep up. The priority is completing the mission and getting out of this place. After accepting Task 2, the compass changes. The tricolored display is replaced by a solid orange field with only 2 hollow arrows of different widths pointing in completely different directions. I take the wider arrow's direction as my first target and begin moving. U-3-3-4. 2 scans of floor plan we find on a wall at a crossroads, and when I tell it to lead me to the Geller field generator, its scanner reads the map and it begins moving through the labyrinthine corridors without hesitation. The path is eerily quiet. After nearly an hour of winding through the ship, U-3-4 Two halts before a heavily damaged 5-meter-tall armored hatch with radial marks in the center and cooled metal slag splattered everywhere. The Gothic label above reads Shield Equipment Bay. Inside, a massive complex mechanical structure occupies most of the bay. Countless thick cables and energy conduits coiled around it like giant pythons. The device has been shattered and destroyed a long time ago, but the compass arrow does not point at the giant destroyed device. It points to a corner where a humming large rotating cylinder, 6 meters tall and nearly 2 meters in diameter, is encased in a transparent outer shell. I place my hand on it and try to submit it to the system. A prompt asks if I want to submit the Geller Field Generator Core. The moment I confirm, the entire massive generator vanishes from sight, as if snatched away by something, leaving behind a large hole apparently leading to the hull's exterior, with sand pouring in, and sporadic electrical sparks from severed cables. Almost simultaneously, the Geller field enveloping the wreckage loses a piece of its continuity. My location within the field is now critical. Churning chaos energy begins to pour into certain areas inside the wreckage. As I become exposed outside the shrinking field, the chaos mist I could originally see actually vanishes from my sight. My trait as an untouchable makes me directly immune to this supernatural power. I do not linger. Led by the second arrow on the orange compass, I rush with you. 3342. Toward the mid-level broadside deployment zone. The map U-3342 recorded transforms our navigation completely, but the journey becomes more dangerous. The intrusion of chaos energy makes the lights flicker more violently and the environment extremely unstable. Crossing a wide storage zone, I suddenly stop and pull U-3342 behind a pile of collapsed crates. Through a gap in the ruptured deck below, an adult ant ox far larger than the juvenile is feasting, its massive body carrying immense pressure, deep blue chitinous shell glinting under the emergency lamps. Those terrifying pincers are easily tearing apart Chu Yan tyrant corpses and stuffing large chunks into its mouth. I signal U-3342 to circle around from above to avoid it, but U-3342 cannot understand gestures, and its heavy mechanical body steps on and collapses a loose metal plate with a loud thud. The feeding antox jerks its head up, its crimson compound eyes with thermal vision locking onto me instantly. Enraged, it tries to jump directly up through the deck gap. I run without looking back. U-3342 follows, alternating metal legs clattering rapidly on the metal floor. After chasing us for about a minute or two, the heavy footsteps behind us stop abruptly, replaced by furious roars and the ear-piercing noise of metal twisting and shattering. The antox seems to be fighting something else. I lead U-3342 a bit further away and lean against a wall to catch my breath, confirming the antox really is not pursuing us. I take a bottle of mineral water from my storage and down it to suppress the burning sensation in my throat. Glancing at U-3342 standing statue still beside me in the dim light, its half-mechanical face looking exceptionally eerie. I tell it to report its status. It replies in a steady electronic voice that by the will of the Omnissiah, all structures are intact and biological component cycling is stable. I make a joke about the flesh being weak and the machine being strong, then tell it to continue leading the way. The corridor gradually widens, mechanical arms and maintenance stations appearing along the bulkheads, and then after passing through a completely failed airtight door, the scene opens up. A wide compartment, dozens of meters long. I am standing on a second-floor walkway, and on the first floor below are rows of empty berths, loading decks open, twisted railings and wing-like fragments scattered everywhere. Further in, the view is more horrific. At the end of the compartment, wrecks of armored vehicles, landing craft and transport planes are piled on each other, crushed and shattered, forming a massive graveyard of steel. Overturned tank turrets without their guns, fighter jets with broken wings impaled on troop carrier wrecks, charred marks everywhere. Someone was conducting an emergency deployment before this ship crashed and preparing for a landing operation. Just as I am about to step forward and search for a usable vehicle, a figure stumbles out of a half-ajar hatch in a side passage, movements accompanied by a highly uncoordinated twitching sensation. The figure wears a robe of ever-shifting colors adorned with eerie geometric symbols, and on the face is an exquisite and peculiar metal mask. The only visible part, the eyes, shine with a ghostly blue light mixing madness and thirst for knowledge. Spreading both arms, the figure shouts in Gothic, calling me a fascinating variable and announcing an intention to offer my soul to the Lord of Change. I immediately point my laser shotgun at it. It announces itself as a servant of the Great Plan, an interpreter of fate. Lord of Change. Xiench. This is a chaos sorcerer. I pull the trigger before it finishes talking. There is nothing to discuss with a raving lunatic, and every person in this place seems completely insane. The beam erupts, but at about half a meter from the figure's body it strikes an invisible prism covered in hexagonal patterns and is instantly deflected and decomposed into harmless light particles. The sorcerer taunts me, then forms complex mudras, sending a ball of constantly shifting blue fire rushing toward me. The fire enters my range, makes a soft sound like water on a hot iron plate, and is instantly annihilated, leaving not even a wisp of smoke. The sorcerer freezes. Its psychic fire and frost and lightning all disappear the same way, and it stands there waving its hands and shouting the names of supposed powerful moves while I watch with a trace of pity in my eyes. The Warhammer universe is too dark. This person has gone completely insane. The look of pity seems to deeply provoke the opponent. It stops its futile spellcasting and stares at me with those ghostly blue eyes, then leaps back, voice trembling with shock and fanatical fervor, and announces that I am a god-forsaken one, a child of the void, a blind spot of fate, an absolute paradox of logic, a perfect research subject. Since elegant methods cannot touch me, the sorcerer resorts to crude ones. Its powerful psychic energy surges not toward me, but toward the mountain of vehicle wreckage in the distance. And with a grating sound of twisting metal, several heavy armored vehicle wrecks and massive landing craft fragments rise into the air and hurtle toward my position. I immediately switch to the plasma pistol and fire at the sorcerer, and the beam explodes into energy turbulence on the invisible psychic shield in front of it, making the sorcerer's body shake violently, without causing effective damage. Long-range attacks are useless. In Warhammer, no matter how advanced the setting, the most effective method against a psychic opponent is sometimes just to get close with a large blade. I stow the plasma pistol and draw the fine-engineered combat dagger, its monomolecular blade reflecting a deadly cold light. With massive wreckage falling like a small mountain, I notice a hole in the deck behind me leading to a wide pipe trench below. I tell you, 3342 to follow and step back, falling directly into the deck opening. The wreckage crashes heavily nearby, the shockwave carrying metal fragments and dust sweeping outward. In the trench, I estimate the distance to the sorcerer, about 12 or 13 meters, open area in between. Charging directly is too slow. I tell you, 3342 to use its mechanical arm to push me in the sorcerer's direction. Without questioning you, 3342 opens one claw to support my hip, supports one of my feet with the other, and abruptly shoves me out. The immense force propels me several meters. I take 2 quick steps on the ground and roll directly toward the sorcerer. The moment I enter the 5-meter radius around it, the sorcerer's threatening shrieks turn into wails of extreme pain and terror. My untouchable field is cutting it off from the warp. The psychic echoes and streams of knowledge that usually granted power are being forcibly erased by nothingness, its source of wisdom and the blessings from the Lord of Change rapidly drying up. The sorcerer curls into a ball, clutching its mask, writhing and twitching on the ground like a puppet whose strings have been cut. I lay on the ground nearby and allow myself a slightly savage smile. Now it is my turn. I crawl closer, raise the fine-engineered combat dagger, and slash at the connection between the mask and the robe. The monomolecular blade meets almost no resistance. The wail beneath the mask abruptly ceases. The body twitches violently a few times and then goes completely still. The shifting robe gradually fades to lifeless gray. The system logs 3,500 survival points for a killed Psyker of Chaos. I retract the dagger, wipe the blade on the dull robe, and climb to my feet. The sorcerer's body is already beginning to decompose into pale ashes. Its methods were useless against an untouchable, and once engaged in close combat, a sorcerer's mortal body unprotected by psychic energy is not much stronger than an ordinary person's. I note that it was worth quite a lot of points. I tell you, 3342 to scan the area for other energy anomalies or signs of life. It reports severe environmental interference making the scan obstructed. Right. My untouchable nature means I cannot see the psionic storm's anomalies around me, and under psionic interference, 3342's sensors cannot complete a full scan anyway. I set that aside and carefully lead you, 3342, toward the graveyard of steel. The wreckage that had been packed with almost no gaps is now loose from the sorcerer's psionic power. As 3342's weight presses down on it, the metal emits terrifying twisting sounds. Using the system's data prompts, the identities of the twisted remains appear to me. Sentinel Walker destroyed, Chimera Transport destroyed, Layman Rust Tank destroyed, a long string of red destroyed markers acting like cold tombstones. I look around unwillingly, and then amidst the cluster of destroyed markers a faint blue prompt flashes by. I lay flat and peer through a crack. An orbital assault lander marked destroyed, and nested inside its marker, a rhino-armored personnel carrier marked lightly damaged. The vehicle is like treasure buried inside a mountain, visible but out of reach. I ask you, 3342 to locate it precisely. After scanning, it reports the Rhino is inside the internal cargo hold of the orbital assault lander, accessible through a rupture in the lander's top armor, but the main hatch is covered by 2 Sentinel Walker remains and a large amount of structural debris that 3342 cannot safely remove. I look at my subdimensional storage's 2 cubic meters of space and feel a brief pang of powerlessness. Then it occurs to me, if I cannot move the wreckage, I can make it collapse on its own. I ask you, 3342 to calculate the key support structures for the pile and mark the vulnerable nodes. A red infrared beam marks several inconspicuous positions on the wreckage. I pull out the plasma pistol and fire 3 scorching plasma beams in succession at the marked targets. The vaporized and melted structures send the pile groaning and sliding and collapsing, and I back away with you. 3342 until the dust settles. Most of the heavy wreckage is slid off the lander, revealing a huge tear in its side. I cool the molten edges with 100 points worth of untreated sewage bought from the market. Then signal you 3342 to lift me, and I carefully squeeze through the tear into the broken interior. Inside, a dark green hole nearly 5 meters high sits quietly on mounting racks, its thick armor covered in scratches but structurally intact. And even more surprisingly, the variant is equipped with a twin-linked autocannon turret on the roof. I walk to the hatch, deploy the short ladder, turn the valve handle, and pull the armored door open. The cockpit and passenger compartment are separated, the interior spacious, the center divided by empty weapon racks with seats along the walls. In the driver's seat, I find the start button on the panel after a careful search. I say a prayer to the machine spirit and press it. A faint current hum, and then the indicator lights come on one by one and the engine emits a low, powerful roar. The system announces that the mission preservation of the Spark is complete. I listen to the engine running and feel a rush of excitement. I select the Rhino Armored Personnel Carrier as my modification target and spend a moment thinking through the materials. The vehicle already has twin-linked autocannons, and I have nothing in my possession more powerful than an autocannon. After deliberating, I choose a laser rifle as one modification material and add the miniature Gellerfield generator as another, hoping to merge it with the vehicle's power system so it can protect the occupants from chaos energy without a separate power supply. But a red error appears immediately. The core component is missing. The mission description required at least one intact core processing unit from a normal servitor, and I had skipped past that line without fully registering it. A rogue servitor's core would not work. Besides you, 3342, only the industrial servitors in the power bay are functioning normally. Getting their core unit would mean attacking those massive machines with their light armor cage frames and mounted laser cutters, and it is an almost impossible task. It would also mean returning to the power bay where the adult Antox is feeding. The system detects you, 3342, standing guard at the breach of the lander, and offers it as an available advanced servitor unit, and asks if I want to submit it as material to complete the deep modification. Several faint, sharp howls reach my ears from the deep corridors of the ship. My hesitation vanishes. A plasma pistol could destroy an industrial servitor's limbs, but returning to the power bay with an adult Antox there is a pipe dream. Staying any longer leads to certain death. I look at you, 3342, through the cockpit observation window, and feel a genuine reluctance I cannot quite explain for a servitory I have known such a short time. Then I select it and confirm. Blue light appears. U-3342 is disintegrated above the abdomen and its mechanical components dismantled. It floats upward and merges into the vehicle's body along with the Gellerfield generator and a laser rifle from my storage. The Rhino's metal shell begins behaving like a living thing, devouring the materials. Binary prayers ring uncontrollably through the vehicle's speakers, and the melting, writhing dashboard terrifies me for a moment into thinking I too will be devoured. But the system prompt confirms fusion modification complete. The Gellerfield generator now sits in the center of the vehicle, cables from the metal connecting and securing it to the chassis. A field bubble envelops a 5-meter radius around the vehicle. The chaos energy that was previously invisible now appears to me as dry ice fog surging along the ground. The upper torso of you, 3342, appears embedded in a groove on the side of the turret basket, its eye sockets filled with new metal components, becoming a fire control servitor capable of operating the vehicle's weapon systems. Looking at the system description, I allow my eye to twitch. The new twin-linked autocannon on the roof now has an additional 4-barrel rotary laser gun and a scanning array of small radar and sensors, which will be the fire control servitor's eyes. I climb outside to inspect the exterior and find the vehicle looks almost unchanged, but visibly newer, as if even the paint has been reapplied. I climb back in, pull the gear lever, and the tracks begin to operate. The armored vehicle tears through the already twisted assault lander hull with its own staggering power and forces its way out of the metal wreckage. But after looking around for a long time, I find no passage wide enough to leave the hangar through. I ask you, 3342, if it can scan the surroundings for an exit. You, 3342, responds through the comms, its voice coming through the helmet now. A screen on the dashboard shows me that at the ends of the parking bays are upward opening armored hatches, and some are at surface level with chaos energy pouring through their gaps. You, 3342, marks one damaged hatch and requests authorization to fire at its fixing mechanism. I tell it to fire. 2 shots from the autocannons strike a mechanical structure, and the hatch, weighing at least 10 tons, tilts outward under gravity and slams onto a sand dune, forming a ramp. Chaos energy rushes into the hangar, the Gellerfield flickering violently before stabilizing. Fine grains of sand rustle against the vehicle's shell. The massive body of the rhino drives down the half-meter drop from the berth inside the hangar, treads crushing the slope formed by the tilted hatch, and plunges into the raging psionic storm outside. I park sideways on the sand and take one last look at the massive wreckage of the ship behind me. Under the grotesque sky, its fragmented silhouette looks more like a giant steel tomb, burying countless secrets and dangers. I turn my gaze toward the world ahead, shrouded in the chaos storm, and slam the accelerator. The vehicle turns and charges toward the sand dune slopes surrounding the basin. Outside, the world is a bizarre nightmare that defies the laws of physics. Patches of sand dozens of meters away are covered in sheets of frost without warning, and on the other side, towering flames spontaneously ignite on empty desert and burn silently. Pale lightning appears and strikes the ground. The silhouettes of distant sand dunes constantly warp and fluctuate. Strange entities wander here, some that look like aggregates of sand and spiritual light, like earth elementals from some game, and grotesque lumps of flesh with recklessly reorganized bones crawling on the sand and emitting inhuman sounds. I try turning off the Geller field briefly to test my untouchable trait. With the field off, the frost still exists on the sand not far away, but the flames and lightning vanish, and the monsters remain. Psionic energy and matter have combined into actual physical forms. I feel terrible looking at the actually existing twisted entities and reactivate the Geller field immediately. The rhino's heavy chassis and 4 independent wide treads allow it to move with unstoppable momentum on the soft sand. After completing the Task 2 mission, the compass has changed dramatically. The 3 colored areas are now filled with a large number of arrows like a complex star map. I focus on the compass, and it conveniently enlarges in my vision. I find what appears to be the widest green arrow pointing straight into the depths of the desert, and lock onto it as my target. The moment I choose it, the arrow turns gold and the excess pointers hide. I spin the steering wheel and slam the accelerator. At nearly 100 kilometers per hour, a vehicle body weighing dozens of tons, I feel the joy of speed for the first time since arriving here. I drive with one hand and take out roast meat from my storage with the other to chew on. Then a burst of crimson splashes across the windshield, and a system log records 30 points for a killed twisted flesh. Before I can process that, the sand 50 meters ahead arches upward and explodes like a volcanic eruption. A massive creature bursts from the sand, the size of a subway car, a diameter of over 6 meters, segmented dark purple chitinous shell with thick fluorescent slime between the gaps, and instead of a head, a giant circular lamprey mouth filled with dozens of spiral-arranged bony teeth, with dozens of tentacle appendages with spikes at their ends waving around it. Its massive body churns the sand sea and lunges for the armored vehicle. I think, with deep resentment, that this is a sandworm and that the system seems to be targeting me personally. My hand on the steering wheel remains steady. I swing the front around and race in the opposite direction, telling you 3, 3, 4, 2 to search for targets and fire at will. The turret swivels, twin-linked autocannons turning toward the rear and instantly locking onto the massive maw. 30mm armor-piercing high-explosive rounds hammer into the interior of the sandworm's gaping maw, the fragile throat area and the roots of its tentacle appendages. Explosions, shattering carapace and tearing flesh mixed together. Thick fluorescent blood and shredded meat splash out like a rainstorm, and several flailing appendages are blown off at the root. The sandworm lets out a sound of pain from the abyss, and its massive body writhes, but its terrifying momentum carries it slamming toward the rhino anyway. I jerk the steering wheel, and the vehicle evades with agility that belies its size, carving 2 deep arcs into the sand. I drive in close circles. The sheer size of the sandworm means its turning radius is staggeringly large. The autocannon shifts impact points from the mouth to the trunk, every explosion tearing away large sections of outer carapace, laser beams melting the carapace at joints before armor-piercing shells penetrate and explode inside. Large sections of the sandworm's body become stiff. After a mournful cry filled with resentment and despair, its dozens of meters long body crashes onto the sand and goes still. System log. 5,000 survival points for an abyssal great devouring sandworm. I stare at the log with some disbelief. I had driven in a couple of circles and the thing was dead. Such a big target is worth fewer points than the juvenile antox. If this thing ran into that antox, it would be torn apart alive. The thick fishy stench from the sandworm's death seems to ignite this chaos-saturated sand. The sand around the carcass writhes strangely, and a group of nauseating creatures crawls out from the oddly colored pools of blood. Human-like silhouettes, but with writhing flesh everywhere. Their faces lacking any features, and having only a constantly opening and closing circular mouthpart lined with serrated teeth, dripping with corrosive slime. The ends of their twisted limbs are sharp bone blades, and pale bone spurs protrude from their elbows and knees. As soon as these flesh hounds appear, they begin biting each other and attacking wandering twisted flesh nearby, their bodies constantly swelling and deforming as they feed, new bone spurs piercing from their backs, growing larger. Dozens of them notice the rhino and turn in unison, apparently sensing fresh flesh inside, and launch a frantic charge on all fours at incredible speed. I tell you, 3-3-4-2 to engage and eliminate. The autocannon roars, 30mm shells accurately hitting the charging fleshhounds. Targets hit directly are instantly blown into a mist of blood. The rotary laser gun joins the fire, its crimson beams carbonizing targets under high heat, but the number of enemies is simply too high, swarming from all directions, some prying at the armor seams with their bone blades. I drive in circles on the spot, tracks grinding over packs of fleshhounds with an unsettling crunching sound, and then the autocannon abruptly stops. U-3-3-4-2 reports. Autocannon ammunition depleted. After the autocannon ceases, I notice something strange. The kill records are not appearing from the laser gun fire on the roof. Every slight bump and collision of the vehicle body causes kill records to jump. The fleshhounds can apparently only be killed by impact or being crushed. I stomp on the accelerator and drive in circles until the last fleshhound is pulled under the tracks. I park and tell you, 3, 3, 4, 2, to scan the surroundings. No abnormal targets detected. I open the armored door of the passenger compartment to inspect for hull damage. The lower half of the vehicle is almost completely covered in filth. Crushed fleshhound bodies stuck to the track drives. Surrounding sand stuck to those fragments. After confirming no obvious hull damage, I sit back down. The fuel gauge is still more than half full. A red warning shows autocannon shells depleted. My survival points balance stands at 20,189. 30 fleshhounds plus 13 mutants contributed 5,550 points. Feeling wealthy, I open the exchange interface. 25 points per shell. I buy 300 rounds of 30mm ammunition for the autocannon in one go, which immediately costs 7,500 points. The firepower is worth it. I then spend 300 points reloading a laser rifle, then turn my attention to armor. My simple bulletproof vest has only blocked one strike for me and is barely damaged, but for safety, I decide to switch to proper full-body armor. The variety in the system is dizzying. Besides carapace armor, I can see heavy void armor used by the Solar Auxilia and Spire Hunter armor from the Necromunda Hive world, and even mortal power armor used by Inquisitors of the Inquisition. Their point requirements ranging from tens of thousands to millions. After a brief deliberation, I spend 5,700 points on a Storm of Vengeance military standard full enclosure carapace armor set, keeping the remaining 6,689 as reserve. I lay the set out and examine it. The full set has many parts. There is also a base undergarment, which I put on against my skin after stripping off my clothes that have started to smell, noting with a trace of vanity that the gene-strengthening agent has already begun to show results in my physique. I fumble through the process of putting on the breastplate and torso armor and limb sections, which gradually encase my body in hard plasteel composite materials and reinforced ceramite plates. I feel a layer of sweat forming. Moving is smooth, but my footsteps become unusually heavy, and I notice several cables on the armor with nowhere to plug in. I reach for the helmet, and as it goes on, everything goes pitch black and stuffy. Panicking, I pull it off and sit back in the driver's seat with it in my arms. After examining the complex faceplate carefully for a few minutes, I realize I have to buy the power pack separately. I groan. Back in the system, the Carapace Armor Universal Power Pack is 1,500 points, described as an energy backpack containing 1,000 standard energy units sufficient to power the auxiliary devices for a week. With no other choice, I spend the points. When I take the heavy-looking metal equipment out of storage, I nearly drop it. I fit it into the alloy slot on the backplate, connect all the loose cables, buckle the armor back on, and feel its immense weight make me unsteady on my feet until I grab the driver's seat armrest. When I put the helmet on this time, the locks click and the respirator starts working and the previous stuffiness vanishes. The Storm of Vengeance military helmet integrates an image imager that enhances vision and adapts to different lighting conditions, an encrypted microcommunicator, and a full-face respirator. The bracer screen integrates a miniature bird divination instrument for scanning and remote communication, and pulling out the laser rifle brings up an auxiliary crosshair in my field of vision. It is a pleasant surprise, but the full set plus power pack weighs nearly 30 kilograms, and the fatigue of wearing it is more than I can handle right now. I take off the heavy torso and limb armor, keep only the close-fitting combat suit and combat boots, and put the simple bulletproof vest back on over them. The expensive carapace armor goes into storage. I sit back in the driver's seat and grip the steering wheel. The Rhino lets out a low roar and moves through the sea of sand, following the direction of the compass, continuing through the storm. Perhaps because the vehicle is covered in blood and filth from the fleshhounds, I encounter no attacks on the road, but as the compass needle grows wider, a sense of unease grows stronger in me. Twisted figures, condensed from shadows and malice, begin appearing on the sandy ground, all converging in the same direction I am traveling. I ask you, 3, 3, 4, 2 to scan ahead. It reports high-intensity chaos energy interference, but acoustic analysis confirms sustained explosions and multiple weapon discharges in intense crossfire approximately 3 kilometers ahead. I slam on the gas. On a wide street in the city ruins ahead, 40 or 50 people are rushing toward a building not far away. A middle-aged man stands at the front of the crowd, shouting commands in a hoarse but resolute voice. His name is Wang Noe. He holds a scrap iron shield and a long blade made of white bone, and he is the closest thing this group has to a leader. He directs them to fall back into the half-collapsed building ahead, those with ranged weapons to the rear, those with only melee weapons to hold the entrance. The weapons the crowd carries are varied: sharpened metal poles, machetes, crossbows, and a few pistols. When a young girl trips over rubble and a digging ratworm with a carapace covered in purple veins charges at her through the rubble, a young man thrusts his makeshift metal pole spear at its side. The pole strikes but fails to cause a fatal wound and further enrages the creature. Wang Noe charges over, slams his scrap iron shield into the creature's side, and slashes across its neck with the bone blade. Dark green viscous blood sprays out, and the digging ratworm struggles and goes still. Someone calls out that the worms are digging holes everywhere for the other beasts. Wang Noe pulls the girl up and pushes her toward the building. Everyone speeds up. A deafening explosion rings out as Wang Noe detonates improvised explosives hidden in the ruins, roaring for everyone to get into the building. The ground floor entrance is relatively intact, a heavy alloy door covered in welded patches held deliberately open, 2 people with shotguns guarding it. But just as the crowd surges through, the ground on one side collapses where digging ratworms have been tunneling, and several yellow figures shoot out like lightning. They are razorback wolves, but larger and mutated. Originally light yellow fur, now mottled with patches of missing hair. Large patches of dark red flesh proliferating on the exposed skin with keratinized layers growing like scales over the constantly pulsating flesh. And some individuals have heads that have split into a second head full of sharp teeth. Their bone blades have grown larger and more twisted, shimmering with an eerie light identical to the chaos energy outside the barrier. Just the ripples from their movement make people feel their consciousness scattering. Wang Noe's eyes widen in fury as he raises his bone blade and shield, but these mutated razorback wolves attack all living things in sight, including each other and the digging ratworms. The 2 shotgun guards open fire at the wolves lunging toward the crowd, the buckshot causing large sprays of blood on several of them. The survivors scramble into the building, and Wang Noe with a few other melee fighters coordinates with the shotguns and handguns to cover the rear. The heavy alloy door closes with a screeching friction sound, blocking most of the frantic roars and impacts from outside. Everyone can hear the heart-stopping grating of beast claws and bone blades scraping against the door panel. Inside the packed hall, Wang Noe loudly directs the crowd, those with melee weapons to cooperate with those with shotguns and guard the second-floor entrance, those with ranged weapons to form groups and provide fire support as the situation demands. In a corner, several people in overalls are quickly dismantling small lathes and welding equipment and electronic workbenches. A young man wearing goggles, face lightly stained, steps forward and hands Wang Noe a bottle of water. His name is Lee Seung. He confirms that Big Brother Shoes Group is under pressure on the east side too, and that they just used a lot of explosives to repel a wave. Their materials are running very low, especially a few chemical raw materials. Wang Noe takes the water, gulps it down, and tells Lee Seung to have the workbenches moved to the 3rd floor first and to see if they can buy some materials from the market. Their survival system is different from the one Seongbaum has been using. Instead of directly exchanging for finished products, they have a tech tree with a crafting interface that unlocks progressively, from basic cold weapons up to gunpowder weapons and simple electronics, extracting metals and compounds and crystals from remnants in the ruins by decomposing them. This city ruin is a massive treasure trove for them, and their combination of manufactured firearms, explosives, and the ruins' resources is what lets them hold a position that no group armed only with cold weapons could defend. Wang Noe became leader partly because he accidentally saved Lee Seung's life and partly because of his background as an active-duty soldier. He wipes his face and glances at a hand-drawn map hanging on the hall wall, marking the defensive areas and resource points. He says quietly that they must hold, at least until the storm passes. Then a heavy impact, far heavier than any before, slams into the alloy door from outside, shaking the entire hall, leaving a clear 5-fingered dent in the door panel. Everyone's hearts sink. Something even more terrifying has been attracted to them. The heavy pounding sounds on the alloy door are like death knell war drums, each strike deepening the 5-fingered dents in the panel and shaking dust from the walls around the doorframe. The welded patches groan under the unbearable strain. A lookout on the 2nd floor confirms through a trembling voice that it is Chuyen tyrants, and mutated ones, more than one. Their already terrifying strength has become even more horrific under chaos. Their mutated bodies grow nearly 3 meters tall, every swipe of their giant claws shuddering the building. More mutated razorback wolves howl madly on the perimeter, while digging ratworms claw frantically at the 1st floor walls. Wang Noe orders everyone up to the 3rd floor immediately and tells them to take all the supplies they can. As they move, he and his fighters set the few remaining explosives along the gentle ramp-style stairs between the 1st and 2nd floor, planning to let the beasts onto the stairs before detonating and then figure out another way if necessary. Just as everyone is busy, a dull engine roar, accompanied by noisy sounds, penetrates the walls from afar. Lee Seung stops in his tracks. The sounds are growing closer. An engine roaring, gunfire, and music. Powerful music full of battle intent, with a chorus they cannot understand, but which feels strangely solemn and exhilarating. The lookout suddenly shouts in excitement and tells everyone to look outside. 2 kilometers away on a sand dune, I look at the scan results from the bird divination instrument, calmly assessing the situation below. I tell you, 3, 3, 4, 2 to mark all high-threat beast targets and prioritize clearing the large units. 3, 3, 4, 2 confirms. 3 mutated ursine targets, 17 mutated canine beasts, and a large number of low-threat targets. Looking at the deep red markers in my field of vision, I feel no fear, only the excitement of seeing survival points. I also have 3, 3, 4, 2 scan the weapons the survivors inside have, 17 antique solid projectile firearms and a small amount of crude, low-quality explosives. To accumulate survival points faster and to learn about other survivors, I decide to intervene. I floor the accelerator and the Rhino charges toward the besieged safe zone. While adjusting direction, I absent-mindedly fiddle with the vehicle's communicator. The channel scan is empty, confirming these survivors have no electronic communication equipment. Tapping the communicator screen, I discover several audio files stored inside with titles in high Gothic like Praise the Emperor and Imperial Glory. I tap one at random. A low chant begins echoing through the cockpit, building into stirring electronic music with dark lyrics, and I inexplicably feel my blood boil and adrenaline surge with the beat. I cannot help but hum along and press the accelerator even deeper. In the jolting of the vehicle, I accidentally hit the button for the external speakers. As the intense Imperial techno blares outside the vehicle, 3, 3, 4, 2 begins firing the autocannon. The 30mm armor-piercing high-explosive rounds tear through the Razorback wolves on the outer perimeter like paper, often blowing them in half. Kill records appear. The vehicle rams through beast carcasses and advances. The 3 mutated Q-Yan tyrants that have already smashed the alloy gate out of shape are struck in the centers of their massive torsos. The explosive flashes easily tear through muscle and bone, leaving massive blood holes over half a meter in diameter, and the behemoths collapse with a thud even before they finish their wails. 3, 3, 4, 2 delivers follow-up shots to their heads to be certain. The rotary laser gun sweeps around the perimeter, quickly slaughtering digging ratworms and ordinary Razorback wolves. With the tracks locking up, the vehicle skids and comes to a steady stop in front of the scarred building's gate. I take a deep breath. It is my turn to make an entrance. After confirming the vehicle has stopped, I immediately don the heavy carapace armor. Looking cool matters even if it has no power assistance, and the weight is only a temporary issue. I pull out the Mars pattern MK4 laser rifle from storage, open the armored door and jump down. I tell you, 3, 3, 4, 2, to maintain vigilance and fire at will at all approaching threats. Then step up to the crumbling alloy gate. The deformed frame has the gate firmly jammed. Mildly embarrassed, I activate the bird divination instrument to scan the interior. First floor is clear. I draw the plasma pistol with one hand and flash 2 thick beams of blue light. The jammed alloy gate disconnects from the frame and topples backward, molten metal dripping from the cut edges. Inside the building, Wang Noe and Lee Sung and all the survivors guarding the second floor stare blankly at the changes occurring below. Against the chaotic light and dust from outside, the figure that appears is covered in black armor they have never seen before, the helmet's visor reflecting light with red eyepiece glow, and the uniquely shaped weapon in his hand is clearly not an earthly creation. Accompanied by explosive electronic music, I burst into their field of vision with an entirely different art style, as if intruding from another world. Dead silence fills the entire building. I walk in holding the laser rifle. The helmet's enhanced vision pierces dust and gloom without difficulty. I scan the crowd and complete a quick threat assessment. To someone in carapace armor, the weapons in this room pose no danger whatsoever. I walk to the bottom of the stairs and look up at them and tell them not to be nervous. Wang Noe's voice is somewhat hoarse from tension when he asks who I am. I identify myself as a survivor with ID 73481 and take the initiative to state it, then ask who in this group has ID 00992. Wang No acknowledges it as him and breathes a slight sigh of relief, gesturing to the others to stand down, though he does not lower his guard. He asks if I came from somewhere else after taking the Safe Zone emergency mission. I shake my head and confirm I have no such mission. The emergency mission distributed only to those within the Safe Zone's range at the relevant time, and I was not among them. Wang Noe asks in confusion what brought me here so accurately and with such equipment if there was no mission, then glances outside at the Rhino. Lee Sung cannot contain his excitement and leans out from behind Wang Noe, adjusting his goggles, asking where I got equipment that feels like it is from a completely different technological era. He and the others have spent enormous effort climbing their tech tree to produce a few pistols and shotguns, and some explosives, and I seem to have stepped out of a high-end sci-fi production. I choose a vague but not entirely untruthful answer. Different opportunities. And when I woke up, I was near ruins with a relatively high level of technology. I also do not reveal that my system is different from theirs. Wang No is more concerned with another pressing issue. He asks how I crossed the psionic storm to get here, noting that even in closed rooms, people who were touched by the leaking energy went mad or mutated into masses of flesh. He stares intently at me through my armored visor, trying to see something. Just as I am about to speak, he quietly instructs a few people to bring some of the lucky awakened. He wants them to look at me. Several men and women with unusually pale faces but eyes flashing with a strange light are brought forward. Those who survived exposure to the psionic storm and awakened weak psionic powers. The moment their gaze falls upon me, a piercing, agonized scream erupts from a young girl's mouth. She looks as if she has seen the most terrifying sight in the world. Her eyes widen to their limit. Her pupils constrict, and she staggers back, clutching her head tightly, screaming incoherently that I am a monster, that everything around me is empty, that I am a walking black hole, a rift, that my presence is devouring everything and her soul is being sucked away. She struggles to shrink back as if being near me would cause her to be swallowed by the void she describes. Almost simultaneously, the expressions of the other psychers change drastically. Their psionic perception is less sensitive than the girls, but they all feel an unimaginable weakness and silence in my vicinity. One of the psychers forces himself not to lose composure and shouts at Wang No with a trembling voice to make me leave immediately. The scene becomes incredibly tense and chaotic. The ordinary survivors cannot see what the psychers are perceiving, but the violent reactions are real enough, and words like monster and black hole and rift and devour combine with the psychers' terrified behavior to send everyone's fear of me skyrocketing in an instant. Weapons rise again with a clatter of metal. Wang Noe's expression becomes extremely grim. He had not expected things to develop this way. He asks me to explain what they are seeing and what exactly I am. I understand exactly what is happening. Ordinary untouchables are usually merely loathed and feared. The psychers with their direct psionic perception are experiencing the full force of what my nature means to being sensitive to the warp. I face Wang No's questioning and the surrounding gaze is filled with alarm and suspicion, and simply ask back, "Explain what?" I tell them I am standing here and I saved them, and that is the fact. As for what the psychers see, that is only because their own power is fragile, and they simply cannot comprehend true silence. Wang Noe chews on those words with a furrowed brow, unable to judge whether it is sophistry or some truth beyond their reach. My purpose for coming here was never to integrate with them. The rescue was incidental. Intelligence and potential trades were secondary goals, and since the other party cannot accept my presence, there is no need to continue wasting time. I tell them it seems I am not welcome here, and that they should consider the intelligence I have shared as a gift. No longer paying any mind to the trembling muzzles or terrified gazes, I cradle my laser rifle, turn around decisively, and step back through the collapsed gate with heavy strides. Someone says blankly that I just left like that. Wang No opens his mouth, but no sound comes out to ask me to stay. My life-saving grace is a fact, but the near-collapse reactions of the psychers are equally shocking. He needs time to digest this and unify internal opinions. After leaving the building, I do not return to the Rhino immediately. The mutated razorback wolves killed by the autocannon are scattered across the open ground, along with the 3 massive mutated Q-Yan tyrants. These monsters mutated under chaos energy saturation, and their carapaces and bones and the bizarre tissues they grew might contain special energy or materials worth collection points. I take the fine-engineered combat dagger from storage and begin cutting. The monomolecular edge more than a match for the materials, though the autocannon's power left almost no good meat intact. Still, I harvest a rock-cleaving talon from a mutated Chu-Yan tyrant and several crystalline spine blades from the razorback wolves, among other items, and the collection entries scroll through my log. My survival points rise to 15,269. On the second floor, some survivors watch me looting the spoils of war as if no one else exists, and mindsets begin to change. Fear is still present, but in some hearts another emotion is sprouting. One man with flickering eyes leans close to Wang Noe and lowers his voice, eyeing my equipment in the armored vehicle outside and suggesting that getting their hands on those things would change everything. Wang Noe shouts at him to shut up, though his own gaze at my back is incredibly complex. The man's name is Zhou Gyu, and not everyone around him maintains reason and restraint like Wang Noe does. Zhou Gyu's small group has been responsible for manufacturing and storing explosives, and their personalities are inherently radical and greedy. My power terrifies them, but the armor and the vehicle are an irresistible temptation. They talk among themselves in low voices, deciding I am still flesh and blood no matter how powerful, and that while my back is turned, they should drop their most powerful improvised bomb from above and take everything after. Once the evil thought is born, greed overrides fear and reason. I put the last valuable crystal spine blade into storage and stand up satisfied, my survival points having risen to 15,269. I turn to walk toward the Rhino and reach out to pull the central armored door open. Inside my helmet, a red warning appears. Explosive projectile detected. U, 3, 4, 2, in a state of alert with more combat data than its original form, locked onto the source of the threat through its scanners far faster than I could register it. The autocannon swivels and elevates with a reaction speed far exceeding that of a normal human, and 2 30mm shells leave the chamber instantly. The first hits the attacker's upper body directly, vaporized without a wail. No chance to react. the improvised bomb slipping from the grip that no longer exists. The second shell detonates against the third-floor outer wall, hitting the bomb from outside and setting it off. The explosion erupts violently at the third-floor wall, nearly a pound of high-energy explosives plus stone fragments producing a destructive force far exceeding what that crude device should have been able to generate. A huge hole is blown directly into the wall, the bricks at the edges tearing outward radially. I saw the warning and tried to evade, but the time between warning and explosion is simply too short. The shockwave hits my rear side like a physical iron hammer. The carapace armor suddenly feels weightless as I am flipped 3 or 4 meters away, slamming onto the rubble-strewn ground and rolling uncontrollably several times before stopping. Most shrapnel in the impact slam into the thick hull of the Rhino, producing a dense sound like rain hitting banana leaves, leaving countless scratches and scorched marks on the main armor plates, but very few actual dents. The only significant damage is to the scanning array integrated into the roof turret. Coughing, dizzy, my internal organs feeling shifted, I lie on the ground. The health status icon on my system interface is immediately covered in pale red, with multiple damage statuses: minor internal injuries, mild limb contusions, minor concussion. The carapace armor protected me from anything more serious, but the buzzing in my ears and the definite pain in my body are like gasoline poured on my suppressed rage. I order you, 3342, to open suppressive fire and kill anything attempting to resist. U-3342 reports that its scanning equipment is damaged and it cannot confirm targets independently, requiring an external data link. Lying on the ground, I raise my arm and use the bird divination instrument to scan the building ahead, feeding the spatial coordinates to U-3342. The autocannon fires instantly, 30mm shells tearing through the air and burrowing into the gaps on the second and third floors where figures are moving. Consecutive explosions ring out near the windows. Building debris and flesh and organs splatter everywhere, screams drowned out by the blasts before they can fully form. Wang No immediately realizes what happened and shouts for everyone to prepare for combat, though he knows things are already beyond repair. This private action, initiated by a few individuals, has dragged the entire group into a battle with me. I get up from the ground, pull out the laser rifle, and stalk back into the building, my rage making the carapace armor feel lighter. The bird divination instrument scan data merges perfectly with the helmet display, showing me every enemy's location clearly highlighted through the building's structure, like having X-ray vision. Survivors who attempt to attack from any opening are killed within seconds under the combined firepower of the autocannon, the rotary laser gun, and the laser rifle, and the rest retreat deep into the structure. This is not a fight, it is a one-sided slaughter. I carry the laser rifle and do not even need to raise it carefully, simply pulling the trigger based on the auxiliary markers in my vision. Red beams flash through walls and partitions, finding targets behind cover. Those who hide behind thick metal plates and heavy walls I deal with using the plasma pistol. A massive azure beam vaporizes the cover and the survivors behind it simultaneously, leaving only a hole with molten edges. Efficient, cold, and precise. Floor by floor, like a merciless killing machine. After I personally kill over a dozen survivors who dare to pick up weapons and resist, the remaining living people finally break down completely, huddling in corners or raising their hands and fleeing to higher floors. On the third floor, in a relatively intact room, I find Wang No and 4 or 5 people remaining by his side. Wang No is holding a struggling man whose face is filled with resentment. Zhou Gyu, the one who instigated the attack. Wang No shoves Zhou Gyu forward and says it was him, asking me to spare the rest. Zhou Gyu roars at Wang No, calling him a coward and a traitor, and turns to me and shouts for me to just kill him, saying he never expected to survive falling into my hands anyway. I watch coldly and make no move. Wang No tiredly closes his eyes, and when he opens them, only a dead gray emptiness remains. Without argument or explanation, he drives the bone knife into Zhou Gyu's back and through his chest with a clean, decisive motion. Zhou Gyu looks down in disbelief at the tip protruding through his chest, opens his mouth, and collapses after coughing up a large mouthful of blood. Wang No pulls the knife out, lets the blood drip, and tells me calmly that the main culprit is executed and that they surrender, asking me to spare the rest, most of whom did not participate. He pauses, pointing downstairs, and adds that during the recent chaos, his people already placed all the remaining explosives on several key load-bearing structures on the second floor, and if I insist on wiping everyone out, they have no choice but to perish together. The detonator is in his hand, a pressure switch type already pressed. Even if I shot him dead, it would slip from his grip. Wang No's decisiveness is somewhat beyond my expectations. I tell him that the main culprit is dead and I will not pursue this further, but he should not let me find out that anyone else is plotting against me. I say I am not a bad person and not a bloodthirsty madman. My rage has been vented through the killing, and the slaughter has left me feeling unfamiliar with myself. As the nightmare figure steps over blood and corpses and scattered supplies and disappears from view, Wang No finally breathes a sigh of relief and tells someone to quickly disable the signal receivers for the second floor explosives. He sits weakly on the ground, gripping the detonator. He does not know that I paused for a moment on the stairs before continuing down, having noticed a glittering piece of technology near a corpse as I passed, which I picked up casually along with a few bottles of water and a small bag of candy and biscuits, before heading straight for the Rhino. The moment the heavy armored door of the crew compartment closes and locks, I collapse inside the vehicle and tell you, 3, 3, 4, 2 to maintain vigilance. The heavy armored door seals off the gore and chaos of the outside world. I lean my back against the cold metal inner wall and slide down to sit on the floor, and only now does the taut tension in my nerves relax slightly. The waves of dull pain and slight dizziness from my body remind me of the peril I survived. I pull off my helmet and breathe in air tinged with engine oil and the scent of blood, undo the buckles of the carapace armor one by one, take a long drink of water from my storage, and lean against the bulkhead panting until the lingering nausea and dizziness subside a little. I cannot stay here. I get up, sit back in the driver's seat, glance at the deathly silent building outside, and start the engine without hesitation. The Rhino crushes gravel and bloodstains and carries me away from the place of the bloody conflict, through the city ruins until I find a relatively hidden corner several hundred meters away, where half-collapsed building remains form a natural screen while remaining within the coverage of the safe zone's green barrier. After parking and confirming the autocannon ammunition and the fuel gauge, I issue you 334 to maximum alert status. Destroy any approaching threat immediately without warning. Then you 334 2 immediately reports that the data sharing with the mobile bird divination instrument has been disconnected and the vehicle-mounted scanning array is severely damaged and cannot perform wide area surveillance. I put the simple bulletproof vest back on and climb onto the roof to inspect the damage. The twin-linked autocannon turret's scanning array has a component precisely pierced by sharp building debris from the explosion. The fragment still lodged inside, the delicate wiring and crystal components within completely destroyed. I find 4 thick metal bolts securing the casing and buy a heavy adjustable wrench from the trading market for 80 points. Loosen all 4 bolts, stow the casing in my storage, and take the damaged component in hand. The system identifies it. A small wide-area scanning array, damaged with a detection range of 10 kilometers and directional fine scanning capability. An enhanced replacement version is available for 500 points with wider detection range, higher precision, and anti-interference capability. The Rhino is my greatest reliance, and investing in reconnaissance is worth it. I spend the points, carefully reconnect the cables with the new component, and return inside. I tell you, 334 2 to perform a self-diagnostic. It reports all weapon systems functioning normally. The new component online. Detection range increased by 47%. Directional scanning precision increased by 32%. Alert system restored. I breathe a genuine sigh of relief, handle a few personal matters in the rear compartment, then take off my combat suit and spread it on the relatively clean metal floor to block the cold, put on my original clothes, and lie straight down. The chill of the metal floor seeps through the thin fabric, but extreme exhaustion overrides everything. Complex emotions from the recent events flash through my mind like a revolving lantern. The impact of explosions, the coldness of slaughter, the mangled bodies. It is hard to fall asleep for a moment. Lying there, I suddenly remember the item I picked up near the corpse on my way out. I take it from storage, a core component of an advanced artificial intelligence unit. I search my crafting system and find no listing for it, then search for a few more minutes and cannot resist the exhaustion any further. My consciousness is swallowed by darkness, the quantum mind core gripped in my hand as I fall into a dreamless sleep. The deafening roar of the autocannon yanks me abruptly from deep slumber. I roll over, grab the laser rifle and helmet, and scramble to the driver's seat at top speed, heart pounding, and growl at you. 3-3-4-2 to report status. The anticipated scene of monsters besieging the vehicle does not appear. The autocannon turret is returning to its forward position, wisps of smoke still rising from its muzzle, and dozens of meters ahead several grotesque creature remains are scattered on the ground. 3342 reports that 3 unknown organisms attempted to approach the vehicle outside the barrier and were destroyed. I check the log and see no points, and then notice an even more unusual change. The soft green glow at the edge of my vision looks closer than before. The safe zone barrier, which originally covered the area like a giant dome, has visibly retracted. My current parking spot is almost pressed against the new boundary. If I had parked just a little further out, the vehicle would have been outside entirely. I start the engine, move the vehicle further inside the barrier, and park again. The coverage has shrunk by about 1/5. Some building ruins that were originally protected by the barrier are now exposed to pervasive chaos energy, being eroded at a visible rate. Those who rely entirely on this barrier should be worried. My vehicle's own Geller field makes this problem manageable for me. After parking, I notice that my previous injuries, concussion, and fatigue have all vanished. My health is fully recovered and I have abundant energy and clear thinking. I ask you, 3342, how long I slept. The response, 13 hours and 47 minutes. Nearly 14 hours. I eat biscuits and leftover roasted meat from my storage, sprinkled with gene enhancer powder for this. I note, the 4th enhancement. Then I take out the quantum mind core again and examine it. In the dark universe of Warhammer 40,000, humanity once had a glorious golden age, until a mysterious Men of Iron rebellion nearly destroyed human civilization. Since then, the Emperor strictly prohibited any form of advanced artificial intelligence through the highest edict. Perhaps this is why there is no trace of advanced AI units in my system. I set the core on the dashboard while finishing my food. Then a system prompt appears. Combinable module discovered. And the quantum mind core can be deeply integrated with the current vehicle, replacing the fire control servitor's biological components to add more control and functions. I searched the manufacturing interface for various creations that could use this item. Land Raiders, Manticore self-propelled artillery, and even Imperial Baneblade super heavy tanks require similar control units. But their point costs range from hundreds of thousands to millions, far beyond my reach. After filtering for a long time, I find two realistic options: an attendant servitor modification kit for 8,000 points, and a tech thrall modification kit for 12,000 points. The tech thrall variant is equipped with basic repair tools, a laser welder and cutter, and power pliers, possessing basic mechanical maintenance and combat capabilities, as well as some basic weapon components. Tech thralls are a unique type of servitor of the Adeptus Mechanicus, equipped with various industrial devices, capable of performing simple mechanical repair work, and also serving as basic servant soldiers. Since I cannot repair vehicles and a tech thrall would solve that problem, I spend the 12,000 points. My balance drops to 2,689. The item does not appear in my storage. Instead, a holographic projection materializes before my eyes, showing a rectangular device like a metal coffin, with a prompt to confirm the placement. I turn to the passenger compartment and confirm a corner near the rear.